Chapter 274. Go to watch net. Ziyuan took the lead to leave, making the cultivators of the major sects unable to stand still. Zhou Ping saw that Ziyuan was bleeding from the corner of her mouth. Li Yundong's punch just now was so powerful that no one on the field could stop it. It was obviously not a fake fight. She couldn't say anything more, just stamped her feet and snorted. You're ruthless. Our Jingyi school will get back at you sooner or later. Li Yundong, don't get too cocky. She shouted to the short and fat disciple beside her. Let's go. With that, the three of them quickly flew away. Watch net. 7K. OM. For a time, the people of the Jingyi school and the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school also left. 2 top masters and several experts on the field had left, and the people of the other sects also retreated one after another. Du Fei of the Chuanjin sect of Dragon Gate was the first to salute and said, Jinrenli, today you forced yourself to come forward and defeated 9 masters of our major sects in a row. Your magical power is amazing. However, I have a few words to say, but I don't know if I should say them. Li Yundong's face was solemn. He cupped his hands and said, Please speak. Du Fei said loudly, Today we, the Chuanjin sect of Dragon Gate, will let bygones be bygones for the time being. But in the future, I hope that Jinrenli will advise the Fox Zen school not to do evil and not to do petty things. Otherwise, it won't be so easy to talk to next time. No matter how powerful you are, don't even think about making our sects give up. Li Yundong said in a deep voice. Of course. Du Fei snorted, then turned to the Chuanjin Dragon sect and shouted, Let's go. A disciple from the Chuanjin Dragon sect whispered, Senior Martial Brother, are we going to leave just like that? Du Fei glared at him. You're not convinced? Then go up and fight him. The disciple immediately retracted his head and muttered in a low voice. So many people were beaten back by him alone. If word of this spreads, what will others say about us? Du Fei was furious and scolded. What is more important than winning or losing in this world? It was a promise. A man's promise was worth its weight in gold, and he would naturally keep it. The scariest thing than losing a battle was losing credibility. If you're not leaving, then I'll leave. After that, he strode out of the Taoist temple. The disciples of the Chuanjin Dragon sect chased after him. Senior brother, wait for us. The Chuanjin Dragon sect was a big sect among the 6 great sects. As soon as they left, there was a large empty space. The cultivators of the other sects looked at each other. Watch net. At this time the short, fat Dang Chang jumped out, cupped his hands and said with a smile, Jinrenli, thank you for showing mercy just now. We the Penglai sect are convinced. Goodbye. Before he could finish his words, a cultivator mocked. You are the only one in the Penglai sect. What are you pretending for? Dang Chang acted as if he didn't hear this. He smiled and touched the scar on the top of his head, shaking his head as he walked away. As soon as he left, the Jinshan sect also took their leave. Then the cultivators of the major sects left like a tide. Only some cultivators who were greedy for the powerful magical weapons of the Fox Zen school reluctantly looked back after every step. Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, stared at Li Yundong with sparkling eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. At this time, Ding Nan saw that Li Yundong had single-handedly forced back so many people from the major sections. He stood alone in the field and looked down at all the heroes. He could really be considered a hero. Duguchobai. For a moment, her heart was in a mess, as if a bottle of flavors had been knocked over. Ding Nan whispered to Zheng Yuan, Master, are we still not leaving? Zheng Yuan narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, You go first. I'll be there in a minute. Seeing that the cultivators had left one after another, Li Yundong turned around and walked quickly to Lu Ye's side. After his series of battles, although Lu Yi looked very encouraged and nervous, when the victory was decided, he breathed a sigh of relief and suddenly couldn't take it anymore. Li Yundong saw that Lu Yi was breathing less and more. He nervously grabbed Lu Ye's hand and wanted to transfer Jinshi to him. However, Lu Yi struggled to wave his hand and said with difficulty, You want to find Su Chan's whereabouts. I know, but I have a presumptuous request. For the sake of me, an old man who is about to die, Please promise me, okay? Li Yundong vaguely guessed what Lu Yi was going to say, and a look of embarrassment appeared on his face. Seeing this, Lu Yi panted and said, "Don't worry. Even if it's Su Chan, she will also want you to do this." Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "Go ahead." The corner of Lu Ye's mouth twitched, and he forced a smile and said, "You've seen it. Our Fox Zen school has been bullied. They want to kill us and destroy us. In the future, when I'm gone, if there's no strong leader, they will be bullied sooner or later. Let's go." As he spoke, Lu Yi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood from the corner of his mouth. It was dark red, and it was obvious that he couldn't hold on for long. He suddenly grabbed Li Yundong's hand tightly and said, "Do you want Su Chan to lose her sect in the future? If you take over the Fox Zen school and become the leader, Su Chan will be very happy." Li Yundong frowned and said, "But I'm so young and—" He wanted to say, "I'm not a fox spirit." But he glanced at the other disciples of the Fox Zen school around him and didn't finish his sentence. Lu Yi seemed to know what Li Yundong was thinking. He gasped and said, "Extraordinary times call for extraordinary things. Right now, there is no one more suitable to be the leader of the Fox Zen school than you. If you don't take over, the danger of the Fox Zen school's destruction will come tomorrow. I won't die in peace." Chao Yi, who was standing to one side, also said with tears in her eyes, "Shirbua leader, don't say any more. At worst, we can hide our identities in the future. If the Fox Zen school disappears, let it disappear." After she finished speaking, the other female disciples of the Fox Zen school also covered their mouths and sobbed. Li Yundong couldn't bear to see women cry, especially a group of beautiful women. He immediately sighed and said, "Well, I'll try my best. If there is a better candidate in the future, I will pass the position of the leader to him." Seeing Li Yundong agree, Lu Yi immediately relaxed. He also loosened his old, thin hand that was holding Li Yundong tightly and slowly lowered it. He murmured softly, "In the future you have to treat them better and lead them to the right path. If there are any disobedient ones, you can deal with them no matter how you deal with them. In addition, Su Chan is in Donggu City." The more Lu Yi spoke, the lower his voice became. Gradually, he lowered his head and finally fell silent. Li Yundong felt his pulse and found that there was no pulse at all. It was obvious that he had passed away. He suddenly became anxious. "Hey, where is Donggu City? Can you finish your sentence? F***CK. Is it true that all the people who are about to die are half-hearted?" At this time, the remaining disciples of the Fox Zen school burst into tears. For a moment, the Taoist field was gloomy, and the sound of crying shook the sky. Li Yundong sighed, shook his head, stood up, and remained silent. Chao Yi, the sixth disciple of the Fox Zen school, was obviously the best at making decisions among the disciples. She stood up, wiped her tears, and asked, "Leader, what should we do now?" 2 days ago, Li Yundong was still a college student. Now, in the blink of an eye, he had become the leader of a cultivation sect. This change in identity and role made him a little uncomfortable. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Don't call me leader. Just call me Li Yundong." Chao Yi took a step back, shook her head, and said respectfully, "There is a difference in seniority." Then, she said to the other disciples of the Fox Zen school, "Everyone, come and pay your respects to the leader." The disciples of the Fox Zen school stood up one after another and stood side by side with Chao Yi. They bowed to Li Yundong, causing him to hurriedly say, "You don't have to do this, you don't have to do this." However, Chao Yi insisted, "Our Fox Zen school has suffered such a disaster. Although our vitality has been greatly damaged and our sect has withered, etiquette cannot be abolished. If the leader doesn't agree, we won't get up." Li Yundong had no choice but to let them be. Seeing a group of beautiful women in Taoist robes kowtow to him, he felt very strange. After they finished bowing, Chao Yi got up and introduced the disciples of the Fox Zen school to Li Yundong one by one. These disciples were all women. There were 11 of them, including Chao Yi. All of them were so beautiful that Li Yundong was dazzled. When these fox spirits greeted Li Yundong, their eyes wandered, and they boldly looked at the young and handsome new leader. When they retreated, they whispered to each other. This is really rare. In the history of our Fox Zen school, there have only been 3 men who have been the leader, including him. Isn't that right? He's still a pure human, not a fox demon. It's the first time in the history of our Fox Zen school that a foreign being has been the leader. Li Yundong heard their whispers clearly, and he felt more and more awkward in his heart. Standing in the field, he felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. After everyone had introduced themselves, Chow Yi asked, "Leader, what are your plans now?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "I hope you don't mind me telling you the truth. I came here because I was worried about Su Chan's safety. I couldn't stand them bullying the few, so I intervened. But I didn't expect that I would become the leader of the Fox Zen school. I'm burning with anxiety now. I just want to go to Dongwu City to find Su Chan immediately. Only by finding her first can I calm down. I hope you can understand." Chow Yi glanced at Li Yundong and thought to herself, "I didn't expect this new leader to be such a romantic." She said, "Then what should we do?" Li Yundong pondered for a while and said, "I think the major sects should care about their reputation and won't come back. But if there are any thieves with ulterior motives coming, you might as well disperse first and come back after the limelight has passed. I'll wait for you here. I'll go to Dongwu City to find Su Chan and come back. What do you think?" Chow Yi opened her mouth and wanted to object, but she saw that although Li Yundong's tone was one of negotiation, his eyes were firm. It was obvious that he had made up his mind, so she changed her mind and said, "There's no need to disperse. Although the major sects are a little shameless, they still have credibility. Even if there are some thieves coming, we can deal with them. Leader, please come back quickly. Our Fox Zen school can't be without a leader." Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's a group of foxes without a leader." Chow Yi smiled slightly. Just as she was about to speak, her expression suddenly changed. She shouted at the person behind Li Yundong, "Who is it?" Li Yundong turned around abruptly, only to see a cloud of black smoke quickly passing by Yi Yu's body. Chow Yi pointed at the black smoke, and 2 amei short thorns quickly shot out of her sleeves. The thorns stabbed into the ground with a thud, but they missed. After the black smoke passed by, it let out a burst of laughter. Before Li Yundong could chase after it, it quickly left. The black smoke went all the way to the foot of the mountain, before slowly condensing into a human figure. It was Zheng Yuan of the Yinyang sect. Zheng Yuan looked at the Fox Zen school on the top of the mountain and laughed. He waved to Ding Nan, who was standing not far away, and said, "Pinger, let's go." Ding Nan looked at him in confusion. "Master, where did you go just now?" Zheng Yuan proudly took out a golden hairpin from his sleeve and shook it in front of her. "Look, what is this?" Ding Nan looked at it and saw that the golden hairpin was about 5 inches long. Its tip was faintly flowing with silver-gray light, and its tail was a phoenix tail pattern with a golden tassel hanging from it. It looked exquisite. Ding Nan asked curiously, "This seems to be the powerful magical weapon that Yan Feng used to sneak attack Yi Yu?" Zheng Yuan laughed and said, "Yes, this is the threaded hairpin of soul traversing of the Fox Zen school. It's a good powerful magical weapon." "Heh, how could I, Zheng Yuan, return empty-handed from this trip? Good Pinger, when we return to the mountain, I will pass this powerful magical weapon to you. Then you will know the magic of this powerful magical weapon." After that, he reached out to pull Ding Nan's wrist. When their skin touched, Zheng Yuan intentionally scratched her palm with his fingers. Ding Nan smiled slightly, as if she hadn't noticed it, but she sneered in her heart, "Old pervert, how dare you have any ideas about me? You must be tired of living. I should go find the little girl next." Chapter 275. Go to watch net. Chow Yi quickly rushed to Yi Yu's body, took a look, stamped her feet, and gritted her teeth. "I don't know which shameless person took away my Shiji's threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Humph. Luckily, I discovered it in time. Otherwise, junior sister Yi Yu's icy Vajra wheel would have been seized by him." After that, she thought of something and picked up the Vajra wheel beside Yi Yu. She held it in front of Li Yundong with both hands and said, "Leader, this is my Shimi Yi Yu's powerful magical weapon. Please accept it. Watch net. Li Yundong frowned but didn't take it. He asked, "Why don't you keep your shimmies things for me?" Chow Yi said, "This powerful magical weapon was left to Shimmy Yi Yu by the former leader. Now that the former leader and Yi Yu are dead, it is naturally handed over to the current leader, that is, you, to keep. In the future, if you have your own disciple, you can pass on this magical treasure and make it flourish." After pondering for a while, Li Yundong took the Vajra wheel with both hands, and felt that it was heavy. The shape of this powerful magical weapon was very much like a crescent moon when the moon was waning. One side was silver, with a beautiful flying bodhisattva painted on it, and the other side was gold, with a ferocious and brave Vajra Arhat painted on it. Li Yundong stroked the Vajra chakram with his fingers, only to feel that it was cold to the touch. Especially when his fingertips touched the blade on the outside of the Vajra chakram, he suddenly felt a threatening chill from the blade, which made his hair stand on end. "This magical weapon is really strange," Li Yundong said, pointing at the serrated blade on the inside of the Vajra chakram. "Why are its serrated teeth inside?" Chow Yi smiled slightly and said, "In fact, there are also serrations on the outside, but the serrations are so small that they are almost invisible to the naked eye. Once it rotates, this Vajra wheel can cut almost any hard object. The inner serrations are actually more used to lock the opponent's weapon in combat. Sect leader, you can experience the wondrous uses of this magical treasure in the future after you subdue it." Li Yundong nodded. He wanted to put the powerful magical weapon away, but he felt that it was inconvenient. "I run around with the fan of 7 treasures on my back all day long. It's already very annoying. I can't run around with this thing on my back, can I? If the police see this, they'll probably arrest me as a controlled object, right?" Chow Yi covered her mouth and laughed. "As the leader of a sect, are you afraid of the secular police?" Li Yundong spread his hands. "Am I supposed to hide in the mountains for the rest of my life? Entering the world to cultivate naturally has to follow the rules of the world." Chow Yi thought for a moment, took out 2 small colorful brocade pouches from her side, and said, "I have 100 treasures bag here. Although it's small, it's actually a spirit space inside, which can be used to store all kinds of things. However, it had a disadvantage. It could be stored, but it couldn't be taken out. If you want to take it, you have to destroy this 100 treasures pouch in order to take it out." Chow Yi held the bag with both hands and handed it to Li Yundong, saying, "Leader, since it's not convenient for you, you can take this first. Colorful articles. Learn net. Super_speed. More. New." Li Yundong shook his head and said, "This is yours. How can I use it? And if I encounter an enemy and need to use a powerful magical weapon, won't your bag be destroyed?" Chow Yi smiled and said, "Leader, you're treating me like an outsider. If it weren't for you, we would have died long ago, and all our treasures would have become someone else's. Go to see net. 7K. OM. This is also a small token of my appreciation. You saved our Fox Zen school, and so many of our fellow disciples. If you don't use it, won't you disappoint us?" Li Yundong thought about it, and felt that what Chow Yi had said was true. He didn't want to be pretentious, so he smiled and took it. However, as soon as he took it, he handed it back and said with some embarrassment, "I don't know how to use it." Chow Yi suddenly widened her eyes and said in disbelief, You don't know how to use it." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I've only been cultivating for less than half a year, and I only know a little about Shintong magic, so I really don't know how to use it." Li Yundong's words made all the people of the Fox Zen school look at him. This group of fox spirits stared at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open and tongue-tied. Chow Yi even stammered, What did you say? You've only been cultivating for less than half a year? Leader, you're not joking, are you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm really not joking. I only met Suchan a few months ago. After meeting her, I started cultivating." Chow Yi sucked in a breath of cold air, and said with a face full of shock, "You can reach such a level after half a year of cultivation. Leader, you can be said to be the first person in the cultivation world in the past 5,000 years." Li Yundong laughed and said, The first person in the history of cultivation doesn't even know how to use a bag. You can laugh at me as much as you want. When Chow saw that Li Yundong's words were funny and easygoing, she couldn't help laughing and saying, as the saying goes, there are specializations in every field. We cultivators only know how to eat vegetarian food and chant sutras. So when the enemy comes to our door, not only can we not subdue the demons, but we also become a burden to the sect. As she spoke, she spread the bag in her hand on her palm and touched the mouth of the bag with her finger. Then, the bag opened by itself and emitted a dazzling 7-colored brilliance. Chow said, "Leader, please put your powerful magical weapon in." Li Yunyang clicked his tongue in wonder. He put the huge and heavy fan of 7 treasures and the cold and sharp chakram into it. As soon as the 2 powerful magical weapons touched the 7-colored brilliance, they immediately slid into it and disappeared. Chow then gently touched the mouth of the bag again. The mouth of the bag automatically closed by itself, and the 7-colored brilliance also disappeared. Chow handed an empty bag and a bag filled with magical weapons to Li Yundong and said, "When you need to use a treasure, you only need to tear this bag, and the powerful magical weapon will automatically jump out. Go to the internet." 7K. OM. Li Yundong took the 2 bags, which were less than the size of a palm, and said with a smile, "These are good things. It's really inconvenient to carry the fan of 7 treasures all day long." He tied the bag with the powerful magical weapon to his waist and hid the other one close to his body. He said with a smile, "Then I'll go to Dongwu City first. Take care of yourself. I'll be back soon." Seeing that he was about to leave, Chow said, "Leader, do you know where Su Chan is exactly?" Li Yundong immediately stopped and said with a wry smile, "Your former leader didn't have time to tell me before he died." Chow asked, "Dongwu City is so big. Where are you going to find the leader?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "How would I know? If I can't find her, I'll just send a missing person notice." Chow immediately said, "Don't do that. Even if we cultivators enter the secular world to cultivate, we can't make our names public. Otherwise, we will attract the attention of some cultivators lurking in the secular world, and it is very likely to cause unnecessary trouble." Li Yundong sighed and said, "Then I can only look for her one by one." Chow said, "I know a place where Ao Wushuang used to stay in Dongwu City. I think Su Chan will be there." Li Yundong was overjoyed. "Really? Where is she?" Chow said, "Dongwu City, Shantangchili." Li Yundong asked, "Shantangchili? Is that a place name?" Chow nodded and said, "It's a tourist attraction in Dongwu City. It's 7 miles long, so it's called Shantangchili." Li Yundong asked again, "Where is she in Shantangchili?" Chow smiled and said, "I don't know. Leader, you should be able to find her when you get there. It's not that big." Li Yundong nodded and didn't stay any longer. He quickly walked down the mountain and left. Chow looked at his departing figure and sighed inwardly. Fortunately, our Fox Zen school is not fated to die. At such a critical moment, we have such a young and promising leader. How lucky we are. Li Yundong quickly left Mount Tianlong, stopped a car nearby, and headed for Dongwu City. After about an hour's journey, Li Yundong entered the downtown area of Dongwu City. Dongwu City was an ancient city with a history of thousands of years. Along the way, Li Yundong saw that the city was like an old city. In addition to all kinds of cars running on the street and many fashionable shops on both sides of the road, it retained the ancient cultural atmosphere of an ancient city everywhere. Even the bus station had cornices and arches full of ancient charm. After another 20 minutes, Li Yundong followed the stone road to the busiest pedestrian square in Dongwu City. The driver put him down, pointed to the front and said, "That's where you want to go. Take a few steps." After Li Yundong paid, the driver stepped on the accelerator, and the car roared as it took a turn at the T-junction. Li Yundong was left standing alone at the intersection, looking at the stone archway across the street. The archway was painted red, and 4 golden characters were written on it in bold calligraphy. Shantangchili. When Li Yundong saw these words, He remembered that he was about to see Su-chan, who he had been thinking about day and night, and that he was about to see his beloved girl. For a moment, he couldn't help but get excited. His breathing was a little uneven, and his heart was beating wildly. Li Yundong took a deep breath and walked toward Shantingchili. He crossed the asphalt road and walked onto a round arch bridge paved with stones. Li Yundong walked into Shantingchili, a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. As soon as he got off the bridge, Li Yundong saw that both sides of the street were old buildings. They had white walls and black tiles, cornices and arches, and the road was paved with bluestone. The shops on the street had colorful flags with the names of the shops written on them. On both sides of the road, there were also roadside stalls selling all kinds of antique gadgets. Several young girls were greeting passing customers with red lips, white teeth, and bright eyes. When Li Yundong walked into Shantingchili, he saw that many of the doors of the houses were still made of wood. If it weren't for the many fashionable tourists on the street, Li Yundong would have thought that he had returned to ancient times hundreds of years ago. Li Yundong walked to the door of a snack bar and saw that there were 7 or 8 square tables in the snack bar. Many customers were eating butter pancakes and noodles at the table, eating happily. Li Yundong stopped a young waitress and asked, "Excuse me, do you know Su-chan?" "Oh, she is about 1.65 meters tall, has a good figure, and is very beautiful. She looks about 16 or 17 years old." The waitress looked at Li Yundong with a plate in her hand, smiled, and said in a soft Wu accent, "Do you know her? Do you want to go somewhere else?" Li Yundong was dumbfounded when he heard this. He felt that the other party spoke very fast, as if she was speaking a foreign language, and he couldn't understand a word. He stammered, "What did you say?" The girl smiled and said in Mandarin, "Aren't you from Dongwu?" "I don't know either. You can go somewhere else and ask." Li Yundong suddenly understood and turned to leave. He walked along the bluestone road of Shantingchili. When he passed by a pearl shop, he knocked on the door and asked loudly, "Is anyone there?" A bell-like voice immediately came from inside. "Hey, I'm coming." Li Yundong saw a slim girl running out of the shop, her black braids bouncing. The girl's face was a little hard to see in the dark and deep shop, but the outline of her figure was somewhat similar to Su-chan's. Li Yundong's heart suddenly thumped wildly. He subconsciously opened his mouth and stared at the girl with wide eyes. But when the girl got closer, Li Yundong was disappointed to find that the girl only looked like Su-chan when she was running. She didn't look like Su-chan at all. Li Yundong was disappointed, but he still politely asked about Su-chan's whereabouts. The girl was also very disappointed when she saw that Li Yundong wasn't here to buy pearls, but she saw that Li Yundong was handsome and dignified. She had a good impression of him, so she said with a smile, "I don't know the person you're talking about. You can go ahead and ask." Li Yundong nodded at her with a smile and continued walking along the street. The girl stood at the entrance of the pearl shop and raised her head to look at his back as he left. She whispered softly in Wunong's soft language, "Oh my God, she's really pretty. I wonder if she's my boyfriend's friend." Li Yundong didn't know that he was born with love and that girls liked him wherever he went. He continued walking along the street and was about to ask again when he suddenly heard a voice coming from not far away. "Hey, third Shixiang, how do you think Master will deal with this evildoer this time?" "I don't know. Maybe he will burn and purify her." "Oh, don't ask so many questions. Hurry up and eat. Master called us back from afar. He must have called us back for a ritual. I think this evildoer's cultivation is not shallow this time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called all the Shixiang and Shimi of the temple back." "Third Shixiang, I heard from Shixiang Wuhua that we will have a disaster this time." "Humph, do you believe that guy's words? A guy who is obsessed with beauty all day long. How much cultivation can he have?" As soon as Li Yundong heard these words, his hair immediately stood on end, and he became highly vigilant. He thought to himself, "Could it be that my girl has been caught?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw 2 bald monks in brown robes eating in a nearby noodle shop. Li Yundong subconsciously wanted to rush in and ask the 2 monks if they had caught Su-chan. But he was also afraid of alerting the enemy, so he also pretended to enter the noodle shop to eat. He ordered a bowl of noodles, sat in a corner, and secretly stared at the two monks. The two monks were only whispering to each other, but they didn't notice that they had been stared at by Li Yundong. After eating the noodles, they paid and continued on their way. Li Yundong immediately followed them. The waiter behind him came up with the noodles and shouted, "Sir, your noodles!" Li Yundong threw down a red note, not caring about the change, and immediately followed the two monks from afar. //7854627895541 Chapter 276. Go to watch net. Along the way, the two monks walked very fast. After following them for about an hour, they arrived in front of a temple. Watch net. 7K. OM. From afar, Li Yundong saw the two monks walk to the back door of the temple and knock on the copper ring on the wooden door. Then with a creak, the door opened to the left and right, and a middle-aged monk walked out. When the two monks saw the middle-aged monk, they immediately put their palms together and bowed. "Martial uncle." The middle-aged monk nodded and said in a deep voice, "You're back? We've been waiting for you. Come in." After that, he made way for the two monks to enter the door. The moment he closed the door, he glanced at Li Yundong in the distance, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Yundong only felt that this glance was unusually sharp, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Li Yundong saw that the other party was sneaky and on guard. He was more and more certain that the other party was doing something shameful in the temple. He quickly walked to the wooden door and wanted to break in. But when Li Yundong approached, he saw a talisman on each side of the two wooden doors. The talisman was painted with golden Sanskrit and black Vajra. Li Yundong reached out to push the door open, but the golden Sanskrit on the talisman lit up by itself. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly felt an extremely terrifying and dangerous aura rushing toward him. Li Yundong immediately withdrew his hand. As soon as he withdrew his hand, he saw that the shining golden Sanskrit slowly dimmed again. He frowned and took 2 steps back. He wanted to climb over the wall, but he suddenly found that the black tiles on the wall were also pasted with talismans, but they were pressed by the black tiles. If he didn't look carefully, he wouldn't be able to see them. There must be something wrong with this temple, Li Yundong sneered in his heart. As he thought about it, he quickly arrived at the main entrance of the temple. Shiyuan Temple was an ancient temple with a history of 800 years. It was also a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. There was a large parking lot at the main entrance. Several large buses were parked in the parking lot, and a steady stream of passengers got off them. The leading passenger was holding a small red flag in his hand and shouting loudly. Li Yundong was worried about Su Chan's safety. Ignoring the long line at the ticket office, he squeezed his way to the front of the line and shoved a tourist aside. "Buy me a ticket," he said anxiously, handing the money into the window. When he cut the queue, the people behind him couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "Hey, don't you know the rules? Line up and buy tickets." The one who was pushed away by Li Yundong was a young woman. She also hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing? Line up, where are your manners?" At this time, Li Yundong was so anxious that he couldn't care less about this. He turned his head and glared at these people coldly. Watch net. These tourists only felt that Li Yundong was glaring at them. His eyes were so terrifying and sharp that their hearts skipped a beat. Whatever they wanted to say was stuck in their throats, and they couldn't say it no matter how hard they tried. After Li Yundong bought the tickets, he apologized to these people and hurried into the temple. When Li Yundong had gone far away, these tourists felt the oppressive and suffocating atmosphere relax. They took a breath and began to curse again, especially the young woman who had been pushed away by Li Yundong before. She stamped her feet and cursed. A woman next to her approached and said to her, "Lon Lon, what's wrong?" When the woman named Lon Lon saw this woman, she immediately said, "Lu Xia, you came at the right time. When I was buying a ticket just now, I met a guy who pushed me away. There are so many people waiting in line to buy tickets. They are all obeying the rules, but he doesn't. Is he in a hurry to be reincarnated?" The woman named Lu Xia was the female tour guide Li Yundong had met in Tibet before. Today, She was wearing an orange tour guide uniform and a pink round sun hat on her head. Her wavy black hair was exposed from the brim of the hat, making her look fashionable and graceful. She was holding a handheld DV camera in her hand and said with a smile, "Really? When we enter the garden, we'll take a good picture of him. When the time comes, we'll expose him and let thousands of righteous netizens denounce him." Hearing this, Lanlan was overjoyed. She nodded vigorously and said repeatedly, "Yes, yes, yes." After buying the tickets, she distributed them to every tourist in the travel agency. Then, she and Lu Xia led the tourists into Shiyuan Temple. When they arrived at the Mahavira Hall, the tour guide Lu Xia took pictures of the scenery of the Mahavira Hall and the tourists in the garden. Lanlan, the tour guide, loudly explained the history and customs of the Mahavira Hall to the tourists. After Lanlan finished her explanation, she suddenly pulled Lu Xia aside and whispered, "Hey, Lu Xia, I found that guy." Lu Xia was stunned. "Which guy?" Lanlan gnashed her teeth and said, "It's the guy who cut the queue and pushed me aside." Lu Xia couldn't help laughing. "Do you still remember this matter? I really admire you." Lanlan said angrily, "You weren't pushed aside by him, so of course you don't remember. Hurry up and tell me, are you coming with me or not?" Lu Xia looked embarrassed. She glanced at the tourists who were visiting the Mahavira Hall and said, "We are leading a group, sister." Lanlan giggled, turned around, and said loudly to the tourists, "Everyone is free to move around in the temple for 30 minutes. Don't wander around. Come back here in 30 minutes. The tourists responded loudly and immediately dispersed. Lanlan turned around and said with a smile, "It's settled." Lu Xia smiled bitterly and shook her head. "You're not afraid of being complained. I really admire you." Lanlan laughed and said, "You've already gone out to take private work. What am I afraid of? How was the trip to Tibet exciting?" For no reason, Lu Xia thought of the ghost-like man who looked like a god. She was stunned for a moment, but she quickly reacted. She shook her head and said, "Don't talk about these useless things. Where is the person you're talking about? Go take a look and come back. Go to the internet." 7K. OM. Lanlan said angrily, "What's the use of taking a look? We have to take a picture of his ugly face and dirty crimes, and then put it on the internet to expose the despicable behavior of such a shameless person." Lu Xia pressed her temples and shook her head. "I really can't offend you. It's just cutting the queue. You're making him look like a traitor." Lanlan stomped her feet and said, "Are you going to help me or not?" Lu Xia begged for mercy. Okay, I'll help. Where is he?" Lanlan pulled Lu Xia along the corridor and walked to a hidden wooden door. She looked around and saw that there was no one around. She pointed at the lock of the wooden door and said, "Look, the lock has been broken by him." Lu Xia looked over and saw that one of the copper locks had been pulled out of shape. She was shocked and said in a low voice, "What great strength." Lanlan immediately pressed down on her arm and complained, "Yes, I still feel pain from the hit just now." Lu Xia rolled her eyes at her. "You bitch, he hit the other side of you." Lanlan also rolled her eyes at her. "The wound has been transferred. Can't you do that?" As she spoke, she was about to push the door open and go in. However, Lu Xia grabbed her and pointed at the 2 lines of words on the door. "The monastery is an important place. Idlers are not allowed to enter." She said, "Look, you're not allowed to enter." Lanlan said anxiously, "If that guy can enter, why can't we? Look, he even broke the lock. Maybe he went in to steal something. We are acting bravely for a just cause." After that, she pushed the door open and barged in. Lu Xia couldn't stop her, so she could only stomp her feet and follow in. When the 2 of them entered the door, they saw that they were in a forest. There were peach trees everywhere, and there were many talismans hanging on the peach trees. These talismans were dazzling, giving the forest a solemn and inviolable sense of majesty. At a glance, Lanlan saw a man standing in the middle of the open space in the middle of the forest. She pointed and immediately wanted to speak loudly, but Lu Xia covered her mouth and pulled her to hide behind the forest. Lu Xia covered Lanlan's mouth and stared at the figure with her eyes wide open. This figure was too familiar to her. Even if it turned into ashes, she would still recognize it. Isn't this the cultivator who looks like a god? Lu Xiao's heart was beating wildly. She made a silent gesture to Lan Lan, then let go of her hand that was covering her mouth. She wrote on her palm and said, "Don't speak. Let's see what happens first." Lan Lan nodded and also wrote on her palm, "Shoot him and expose him." Lu Xia nodded, held her breath, and picked up the DV in her hand to shoot. Before she could turn it on, she heard a Buddhist chant. A middle-aged monk slowly walked out from the other end of the forest and said, "Amitabha, benefactor, why did you break into the temple?" Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "I want to ask if your temple has ever seen a girl named Su Chan?" Lu Xia was hiding in the bushes, so she could only see Li Yundong's back. She couldn't see his face, so although she was 90% sure that it was him, she couldn't be sure. But at this time, as soon as Li Yundong opened his mouth, her heart shook and she concluded, "It really is him." She cheered up, turned on the DV, and began to secretly shoot. There were talismans everywhere in the forest, and powerful Buddhist power was everywhere. This power covered up the aura of Lu Xia and Lan Lan. Li Yundong didn't notice that there were two women kissing him more than 10 meters away from him. The middle-aged monk's attention was also focused on Li Yundong, the uninvited guest, and he didn't notice the existence of Lu Xia and Lan Lan. He whispered the name of Buddha and said, "There are countless living beings in the world. In front of Buddha, there is no distinction between men and women, let alone Su Chan," and Li Yundong was worried about Su Chan's safety and was extremely anxious. Seeing that the other party was still talking to him calmly, he said impatiently, "If you've seen her, then you've seen her. If you haven't seen her, then you haven't seen her. What are you talking about?" The middle-aged monk chanted the name of Buddha again and said, "Amitabha, if you've seen her, then you haven't seen her. If you haven't seen her, then you have." When Li Yundong heard this, he became angry. F***ck, I said that sex is emptiness, emptiness is sex. You're beating around the bush with me. It's obvious that you're trying to stall for time. Li Yundong sneered and said, "You're beating around the bush with me. You just won't answer my question. Is there a ghost in your heart?" The middle-aged monk asked, "What is a ghost? What is a ghost?" Li Yundong said angrily, "Whether there is a ghost or not, I can tell at a glance. Get out of the way." After that he was about to rush inside. However, the middle-aged monk chanted the name of Buddha, pushed his palm, and clasped his thumb inward. A Mahamudra came out of the air and slapped toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong's jinqi immediately flowed all over his body, and his bones crackled like beans being fried. He made a Vajra fist with both hands. The index finger of his left hand was straight, and the little finger of his right hand was wrapped around the first section of the index finger of his left hand. The tip of the index finger of his left hand was supported by the first section of the thumb of his right hand. He quickly pinched a handprint. It was the Bodhi guiding the first wisdom mudra, the Vajra fist mudra of the great sun Dharma realm that could destroy all darkness. Li Yundong shouted, "Bang!" The Vajrayana mudra suddenly appeared. As soon as the two fists collided in the air trembled violently, the surrounding woods rustled, and the talismans on the woods kept rattling, like the sound of waves, which was terrifying. The middle-aged monk had intended to stop the enemy just now, so he had only used 30% of his strength. However, Li Yundong had intended to defeat the enemy, so he had used 80% of his strength. As soon as the two collided, the Vajrayana mudra immediately smashed the middle-aged monk's palm print into pieces, and then it rushed toward the middle-aged monk without any momentum. The middle-aged monk was shocked. He immediately pushed his palms forward, and in the blink of an eye, a Vajra that was as tall as a person appeared in front of him. With a rumble, the Vajra dispersed the aggressive Mahavarokana palm print. The two of them were shocked by the fight, and looked at each other vigilantly again. Lu Xia and Lan Lan, who had broken into the place, were already dumbfounded and staring blankly. Only the DV camera in Lu Xia's hand was working nonstop. By the way, I almost forgot to mention that last week, she was ranked 8th on the flower list. It was a pity that she didn't make it to the 7th, but the total number of flowers exceeded 10,000. She's really amazing. Not bad, not bad. This week, it's still the third watch, 246. As usual, it's the third watch tomorrow. Well, I can see the little girl then. Chapter 277. Go to watch net. The Mahavairocana Vajra palm print that Li Yundong had used before was a secret of Tibetan Buddhism. When Li Yundong made this palm, his bones crackled, and his aura emitted a golden light from inside out, without a trace of evil qi. Obviously, he had obtained the true inheritance of the esoteric sect. Watch net. 7K. OM. The middle-aged monk was shocked. He had thought that this person was a thief from the cultivation world, who wanted to take advantage of the situation. He did not expect that he was a master of the Tantric Buddhism sect. Buddhism originated in India, but it was introduced to China during the Han Dynasty. Along the way, it slowly divided into two branches. One branch took root in Tibet and formed Tibetan Buddhism, while the other branch took root in the Central Plains and formed the Central Plains Buddhism of today. Although the origins of these two kinds of Buddhism were the same, in reality, there were many differences in many aspects. On the surface, they were courteous to each other, but in the dark, they fought endlessly and guarded against each other. During the Qing dynasty, after the Tatars entered the Great Wall, they set fire to the Shaolin Temple, torturing the Central Plains Buddhism to the point that it was too horrible to look at. Moreover, the Qing dynasty emperor advocated the unification of the Manchus and Mongols, and the Mongolians believed in Tibetan Buddhism. The Manchus were influenced by them. Therefore, the number of people who believed in Tibetan Buddhism was not small. In addition, Emperor Xuanji of the Qing dynasty surrendered to the Buddhism of the Central Plains on Mount Wutai and became a monk, which caused the royal family of the Qing dynasty to have a great resentment against the Buddhism of the Central Plains. From then on, starting from Kangxi and Yongzheng, the emperors and even the imperial palace all abandoned the Buddhism of the Central Plains and completely turned to Tibetan Buddhism. With the rise of Tibetan Buddhism, the Buddhism of the Central Plains was severely suppressed. As a result, the two sides became enemies. When the middle-aged monk saw that Li Yundong was using esoteric kung fu, he guessed in his heart, could it be that a master of the esoteric sect has come to make trouble? If it was just an ordinary cultivator, the middle-aged monk might have been able to scare him off with a few threatening words. However, if it was a master of the Tantric Buddhism sect, the middle-aged monk knew very well that this was his archenemy of hundreds of years. Something big must have happened for him to come knocking on his door. He could not underestimate it. Li Yundong saw that the middle-aged monk's palm seemed fierce, but in fact, it collapsed as soon as it touched him. Just as he was about to knock the other party down with his palm, the other party suddenly pushed out his palms and released a ferocious Vajra statue. In the blink of an eye, his Mahamudra was shattered. Li Yundong was also shocked. This middle-aged monk looks ordinary. How could he be a cultivation master? How many such experts were there in this temple? Although I am not afraid of one, if there are more, I will not be able to take it. No, I have to end this quickly. He secretly made up his mind. The middle-aged monk knew that the temple was currently open to the public. If the commotion here was too big, it would attract unnecessary trouble. He also decided to end the battle quickly. Watch net. The middle-aged monk put his palms together and held a string of prayer beads between his thumb and index finger. He lowered his head and quickly chanted an incantation. As he chanted the incantation, the trees in the forest suddenly swayed, and the leaves rustled, undulating like waves. The talismans hanging on the branches strangely stood up one by one, and the golden characters on them glowed brightly. The countless runes in the forest emitted a dense light, and then these lights quickly turned into gossamer threads that converged on the stage. In the blink of an eye, they turned into a mighty arhat that was as tall as two people. This arhat was wearing a golden kasaya and had one arm bare. He held a Vajra scepter with both hands and glared angrily, looking awe-inspiring. The arhat shouted loudly, and the Vajra scepter in his hand rushed straight toward Li Yundong's chest. Then, in the sky above the Arhat, a light statue of a Buddha sitting on a lotus was quickly formed and smashed toward Li Yunyang. Before Li Yundong was hit, he felt as if a mountain had fallen on his head. It was so dark that it made it hard for him to breathe. He believed that when it hit him, he would be instantly turned into powder. Without thinking, Li Yundong immediately crushed the 100 treasures bag at his waist. In an instant, the fan of 7 treasures jumped out, and the chainsaw Vajra wheel fell to the ground with a clang motionless. The treasured fan was psychic. Sensing that its master was in danger, it immediately jumped into the air. With a swoosh, the iron fan opened, and all the fan leaves jumped out, forming a fast-spinning tray in mid-air, forcibly blocking the Lotus Buddha's downward pressure. Meanwhile, the 2 ribs of the treasured fan fiercely smashed towards the lotus seat of the Buddha like iron rods. After a few smashes, golden light shot out in all directions. The lotus leaves of the lotus seat scattered in all directions, turning into specks of golden light that fell like stars. When Li Yunyang saw that the fan of 7 treasures had jumped out to protect its master, he no longer cared about the Buddha falling over his head. Instead, he quickly made 3 handprints in a row. They were the Vajra Samaya Mahamudra, the light-gathering Buddha Mahamudra, and the superior Buddha Mahamudra. Li Yunyang shouted 3 times in a row and blasted out 3 Mahamudra in a row. The first Mahamudra hit the tip of the Luohan Vajra solidly. It was like 2 high-speed trains had suddenly collided, causing the surrounding air to buzz and tremble. The ground paved with green bricks also made a muffled thud, as if an invisible giant had stomped on the ground. Watch net. 7K. OM. This time, the Luohan Vajra's momentum suddenly stopped, and its speed and strength slowed down a lot. Then, Li Yunyang slapped out another Mahamudra, slapping the Vajra and sending it flying back. The transformed Luohan caught the Vajra that had flown back. Just as it was about to fight back, it saw Li Yunyang's 3rd Mahamudra follow like a shadow and hit it like a storm. This 3rd Mahamudra was extremely fierce, and it smashed the Luohan into pieces. However, after the Luohan turned into countless golden fragments, it slowly transformed into an Luohan in midair, turning into a Vajra holding a copper bell. The middle-aged monk snorted and said, "Our temple has a history of nearly 800 years since it was built in the Yuan dynasty. In the past 800 years, countless monks in our temple have been chanting scriptures day and night, and countless tourists have worshipped us. The Buddhist faith is as vast as the abyss and the sea, and the Buddhist power is inexhaustible. No matter how powerful you are, you can't defeat the Vajra Buddha transformed by the Buddhist faith of our temple." After that, his fingers flew, and he quickly pinched a few fingers. Many golden rays of light flew out of the peach tree, which was full of runes, and 3 Vajra Arhats appeared. They joined forces with the Vajra Arhats to attack Li Yunyang. When Li Yunyang saw this, he immediately took a deep breath. His 5 fingers were so fast that they were like afterimages. The Jinqi in his body suddenly erupted, and in the blink of an eye, he madly made 12 Mahamudra, smashing the 4 Vajra Arhats. But as soon as he smashed them, he saw that the Vajra Arhats slowly gathered together again. Li Yunyang was shocked and took a deep breath. He thought to himself, "What should I do? Wouldn't this be endless and never-ending?" He thought quickly in his heart, but his eyes fell on the middle-aged monk who was constantly chanting scriptures. His heart skipped a beat. Capture the leader first. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong stomped hard on the ground, causing the Vajra wheel, which had been motionless on the ground, to fly up. Without looking at it, he accurately grabbed the body of the Vajra wheel with his 5 fingers, and then threw it at the middle-aged monk. Although the Vajra wheel had not been turned into Li Yundong's own, and could not be used as a magical item, it was still an extremely fierce weapon. The middle-aged monk wanted to reach out to catch Li Yundong's throw, but when he took a closer look, he saw that both sides of the Vajra wheel were sharp blades, and Li Yundong was pouncing on him like a shadow. Even if he could catch the Vajra wheel, he wouldn't be able to take Li Yundong's subsequent thunderous attack. He could only withdraw his hand and step aside helplessly, Li Yundong had wanted to take down the monk with a series of thunderous attacks, but when he saw that the monk had dodged, he had an idea. He took the Vajra wheel that was nailed to the wooden door, swept past him, and quickly entered the back hall of the temple. As soon as Li Yundong entered the back hall, he heard a buzzing sound of chanting Buddhist scriptures. He didn't stop and quickly ran in the direction of the sound. His heart was as anxious as frying oil. He was afraid that if he was a second late, Su Chan would be killed. But not long after he entered the back hall, he saw countless golden lights chasing him along the way. They transformed into Vajra Arhats and attacked Li Yundong from all directions. Li Yundong didn't fight with them. If he could dodge, he would. If he couldn't dodge, he would smash them with a Mahamudra. Along the way, Li Yundong was like a fierce dragon crossing the river, causing the backyard of Shiyuan Temple to be in a foul atmosphere. Fortunately, the backyard was not open to tourists. Otherwise, it would have been a mess. Li Yundong ran for 50 meters like this, and finally arrived in front of a hall. He looked up and saw that the hall had 6 floors. The highest floor was constantly smoking, and it was obvious that something was being burned. Among the chanting of many Buddhist disciples, there was a faint scream. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He immediately stamped his feet and rushed to the top of the hall from the eaves like a cannonball. However, there were statues of Vajra Bodhisattvas and flying arhats everywhere in the hall. As Li Yundong rushed, these Vajra Bodhisattvas and flying arhats sensed that someone was invading the holy land of Buddhism. They immediately transformed into golden bodies and rushed toward Li Yundong like a tide. Li Yundong roared, and the Jindan's chi in his body suddenly burst out, forcing the countless golden statues back a meter, and then he quickly rushed up. These golden statues only retreated a little, and then immediately chased after Li Yundong like maggots attached to bones. Looking from afar, in the golden light, Li Yundong's figure jumped up and down like a monkey when he forced the golden light back. Sometimes, he was entangled by the golden light, like a giant with feet of mud. He roared again and again, and the two of them were entangled. Li Yundong saw that there were more and more golden statues around him, and they were about to drown him like a monstrous wave. He knew that this was a moment of life and death. He immediately roared, and the heavenly Jindan technique in his body suddenly ran. All the bones in his body crackled, and his body swelled in an instant. In the blink of an eye, his arms became as thick as a thigh, and he grew to more than 2 meters tall, turning into a shining golden warrior. As soon as Li Yundong's body became strong, he immediately stepped on the black tiles of the tower and made a cracking sound. These Vajra Bodhisattvas and Arhats were shocked by the power emanating from Li Yundong's body, and they didn't dare to come forward for a moment. Li Yundong took this opportunity to suddenly jump up a bit and jump to the 6-story tower. With a loud shout, he smashed a wooden window with his fists and broke into the tower. He saw that the tower was full of monks. The outermost monks were wearing gray robes, and there were about 100 of them. The middle monks were wearing brown robes, and there were about 20 of them. In the innermost area, there was an old monk wearing a yellow robe and a gold-threaded red cassock sitting cross-legged. He was holding Buddhist beads in one hand and knocking on a wooden fish with the other. Among these monks, there was a huge wooden pillar, which was full of shining scriptures. A woman with long black hair was tied behind the pillar with her back to Li Yundong, struggling and screaming desperately. Li Yundong had been fighting all the way here, worried about Su Chan, and had long been flustered. He roared, made a Mahamudra in his hand, and slapped the pillar in the air. With a rumble, the pillar was immediately smashed into pieces. The shining scriptures on it also lost their light. Suddenly, the people who were tied to the pillar quickly disappeared, turning into 2 extremely thick golden snakes. One on the left and one on the right, they ferociously slammed into the sides of the main hall, creating 2 holes in the main hall. Then they fled toward the outside of the temple. Seeing this scene, Li Yundong was stunned, and there was a buzzing sound in his head. "Oh no, I made a mistake. This is not Su Chan." Chapter 278. Go to watch net. At a glance, Li Yundong saw two big golden snakes, which were as thick as buckets and more than 10 meters long, scurrying away. He immediately realized that he had made the wrong target in his haste, and mistaken Feng Jing for Ma Liang. Go to watch net. After the two big golden snakes fled, the pagoda became extremely quiet for a moment. All the monks looked at Li Yundong in shock. Vajra Bodhisattva and Arhat Faitian, who had been chasing Li Yundong before, surrounded the 6th floor of the pagoda and glared at Li Yundong. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly and sigh. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but he felt that there was no way to defend himself. He could only admit his mistake, put his palms together and said, "I was reckless and trespassed here. Please punish me, master." The old monk surrounded by the monks turned around. Li Yundong saw that the old monk had deep wrinkles on his face, and his eyebrows were white and long. Not only was there no anger on his face, but his face was full of smiles. He said to the monks with a smile, "My disciple Wu Hua said that our Shiyuan temple should have a calamity today, but I didn't believe it at the time. You guys should know that my disciple is a womanizer all day long. He's a flirtatious monk. He's probably been right a few times, but I didn't expect him to be right for once today. Had this crow's beak. Good things don't hit the mark, but bad things hit the mark. It's a sin." After he finished speaking, he burst into laughter, and the surrounding monks also followed suit. With this laugh, the tense atmosphere in the Buddha hall dissipated a lot, and Li Yundong also relaxed a lot, as if he had just kicked over an incense burner and made a small mistake, rather than letting two snake demons escape. Li Yundong saw that he had rudely broken into the important place of Shiyuan Temple and fought along the way, almost tearing down the main hall of the pagoda. However, the other party was not angry. Instead, he laughed and laughed at himself. The magnanimity and broad-mindedness in his words immediately made Li Yundong admire him, and admire him wholeheartedly. Li Yundong bowed respectfully, put his palms together, and said, "Master, I offended your temple today. If you want to punish me, I will accept it one by one. I will never resist, and I will never complain." As Li Yundong was speaking, the middle-aged monk also caught up with him. He shouted and was about to attack, but the old monk whispered to him, "Step back." The middle-aged monk immediately lowered his head and respectfully retreated, not looking at Li Yundong again. The old monk knocked on the wooden fish with his hand and chanted a few Buddhist names. All kinds of arhats, bodhisattvas, and vajras that had surrounded the 6th floor of the pagoda dispersed one after another. At this time, the old monk stood up and looked at Li Yundong carefully. He smiled, waved to Li Yundong and said, "Benefactor, come with me." Li Yundong saw him turn around and walk down the stairs, so he put away the fan of 7 treasures and the Vajra wheel, and braced himself to follow him down the stairs. Then he went. 7K. OM. The two of them went downstairs. The old monk turned a corner and walked into the meditation room in the backyard of the temple. He lit a stick of incense and sat down on the futon. He pointed to another futon and said, "Young hero, please sit." Li Yundong sat down cross-legged on the futon and said sincerely, "I don't deserve that. Master, you're making fun of me by saying that. I'm young and impetuous. I barged my way in and caused a lot of trouble for your temple. How can I be called a hero?" The old monk chuckled. "Oh, that day, you sacrificed yourself to eliminate evil and drew lightning to strike young Master He to death. Isn't that chivalrous and righteous?" Li Yundong shuddered. His eyes widened as he stared at the old monk warily. "How did you know about this?" The old monk raised his head and laughed out loud. His voice shook the hard and sturdy bluestone ground. "If you don't want people to know, don't do it. You've caused such a big mess, and you think no one in the world knows about it? You're looking down on us. I don't dare to say for others, but the leaders of several big sects in the world definitely know about it." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Then why don't you tell on me and arrest me?" The old monk shook his head and said with a smile, "Why should we arrest you? Do we have to arrest you because you sacrificed yourself to eliminate evil and righteous? Then what will we become? Won't we become old and dim-sighted devils? Hey, let's not talk about anything else. Just what you've done is enough to make all the cultivators in the world look at you in a different light. As the old monk spoke, he raised his head and said leisurely, "There are so many cultivators in the world. Who can be like you, who would rather suffer from lightning and enforce justice on behalf of heaven? Speaking of which, compared with you, we, the senior cultivators, are so ashamed that we can't show our faces." Li Yundong's face was full of shame. "Master, you flatter me too much. I believe that any good man who is brave, responsible, and bold will do what I did." The old monk laughed and said, "You're praising yourself in a roundabout way. Are you saying that you're brave, responsible, and bold?" Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. "That's not what I meant." The old monk said with a smile, "You deserve such a compliment. Alas, the more we cultivators cultivate, the more timid we become. The more we cultivate, the more we fear heavenly tribulation. We really need a young, promising, and chivalrous cultivator like you to come out and cheer up this gloomy cultivation world." As he spoke, he waved his hand at a mahogany square table not far away, and took a teapot and 2 teacups. He poured a cup for Li Yundong and himself and said, "I heard that not only have you passed the heavenly tribulation, but you have also become the leader of the Fox Zen school?" Li Yundong took a sip of tea and was stunned. No way this news spread so fast. Wasn't that just a few hours ago? How could it have spread so fast? The old monk chuckled and reached into the wide sleeve of his robe. He took out a mobile phone, pressed it a few times, and then handed it to Li Yundong. "Go to CNET. 7K. OM." Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that there was a text message on the screen of the mobile phone. The content of the text message was, "The 6 major sects besieged the Fox Zen school, but Li Yundong appeared halfway and defeated the attacks of the major sections. Later, Li Yundong succeeded as the leader of the Fox Zen school. I hope that the major sects who know Li Yundong's whereabouts will share the information as soon as possible." After reading it, Li Yundong looked at the title of the text message and was surprised to find that it was actually a group text message. Li Yundong felt strange and didn't know what to feel. These cultivators are really F***king fashionable. They even know how to use mobile phones to send group text messages. However, how did they know that I would succeed as the leader of the Fox Zen school? This matter was only decided after the major sects left. Could it be that there is a traitor in the Fox Zen school? The old monk looked at the change in Li Yundong's expression and seemed to know what he was thinking. He said with a smile, "Don't think too much. After you left, the Fox Zen school publicized the news of you succeeding as the leader with great fanfare. In this era, once something happens, it will spread all over the world in less than 5 minutes. Therefore, the cultivators of all the major sects in the world are very curious about you. They want to know who the great master, who defeated all the major sects by himself, is." Li Yundong said with a face full of shame, "I'm ashamed. It was just a fluke. Moreover, I have just taken over as the leader of the Fox Zen school, and I have caused such a disaster. I really have no face to see anyone." The old monk laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. Which young man isn't young and impetuous? What's more, Zhenren Li's cultivation time is still short, and he still lacks some tempering. I think that in the future, with his cultivation and character, he will definitely become one of the few great masters in the world. This is a blessing for our cultivation world, a blessing." Hearing this, Li Yundong felt a little better, but he still said with an ashamed expression, "Master, I'm really ashamed. I have caused a lot of losses to your temple today. I will definitely compensate you double." The old monk put his palms together and said with a smile, "There's no need for compensation, but if you are willing to donate some incense money, I will be happy to see it happen." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Well said, well said." He thought that since he had taken over the Fox Zen school, he should be able to withdraw some money from the Fox Zen school first to pay for the repair of Shiyuan Temple. In the future, he would slowly make up for it. After the old monk recited a Buddhist scripture, he changed the topic and said, "Zhenren Li, do you know why I didn't care about you breaking into our temple today and destroying our cultural relics? Li Yundong put his palms together and returned the greeting. I think it must be because you are broad-minded and benevolent. You won't care about a rash kid like me. The old monk smiled and shook his head. No, it's because I know that you have never done evil. On the contrary, you have made a name for yourself in the cultivation world by enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. I admire you very much, so I didn't speak ill of you. You have to know that although our Shiyuan temple is not as long and powerful as the Shaolin temple, it is also an ancient temple with a history of 800 years. It has a deep foundation and the majesty of Buddhism. Just now, when you broke into our 6-story pagoda, if I wanted to attack you, with the power of the Dharma of our temple, even if Celestial Master Zhang of the Jingyi school came, he would have to flee in embarrassment. Li Yundong remembered that when he had broken into the temple, he had encountered the Buddha power Vajra along the way. He couldn't help but nod in agreement and say, Indeed, the Buddha power of your temple is powerful and majestic. It's really amazing. The old monk smiled and said, If it were anyone else who trespassed into our temple like this, they might have been turned into millions of pieces of mustard and couldn't go back. Otherwise, if our Buddhist temple is like a vegetable garden, where people can come and go as they please, where will our dignity and face be if it gets out? When Li Yundong heard this, he stood up, bowed respectfully and said, Thank you for your magnanimity, Master, for not arguing with me. Speaking of this, the old monk stood up and returned the salute. We Buddhists talk about karma and retribution. As the saying goes, good will be rewarded with good, and evil will be punished with evil. It's not that there is no retribution, but that the time has not yet come. Whether it's evil or good, there will be rewards in the end. Jinrenli, if you hadn't done a great deed of kindness, I wouldn't have said these words to you. This is the so-called karma and retribution. Hearing this, Li Yundong felt a myriad of emotions in his heart. He raised his head and sighed. I thought that it was unacceptable to the cultivation world, and the world for me to be struck by lightning. I didn't expect to hear such words today. It really dispels the block in my heart. Thank you for enlightening me, Master. The old monk smiled and said, Not at all. Justice exists in people's hearts, and good and evil exist in heaven and earth. It's our duty to punish evil and promote good. Why do you have to be so polite? By the way, I see that you are anxiously looking for Su Chan. I think I can do you a favor. Li Yundong was overjoyed. Really? Thank you, Master. The old monk put his palms together and said, I only hope that after Jinrenli takes over the Fox Zen school, you will restrain your disciples and not let them do evil. Li Yundong returned the salute solemnly and said, Of course. The old monk nodded with a smile and said, My disciple said that there will be a calamity in Shiyuan Temple today. He also said that if someone asks about the whereabouts of the target, I will tell you where you come from and where you go back. Then you will be able to find her. Hearing this, Li Yundong asked in confusion, Do you want me to go back to Dongwu City, Fox Zen School, or Tianan City? The old monk smiled and said, Amitba, I don't know. Jinrenli, please help yourself. Li Yundong saw that he had closed his eyes, as if he was seeing him off. He stood up, bowed respectfully, and left the meditation room. Li Yundong walked out of the temple thinking about the 2 golden snakes he had let go of. But he didn't see the old monk of Shiyuan Temple blame him at all, nor did he want him to be responsible for catching the 2 golden snakes. Li Yundong couldn't help but feel guilty and thought to himself, In the future, I must catch these 2 snake demons with my own hands. Otherwise, if they do evil in the mortal world, this sin will be on my head. Li Yundong was thinking about it. When he turned a corner in the middle of the road, he suddenly saw 2 figures running into him. At this time, he was full of thoughts and didn't pay attention. He bumped into them and heard a cry, and the 2 figures fell back. Li Yundong was quick to react. He immediately grabbed one person on each side and supported them. He took a closer look and saw that it was Lu Xia, whom he had met in Tibet before, and a woman with a good appearance next to her. It was Lan Lan. As soon as Lu Xia and Lan Lan saw Li Yundong, their eyes widened. They were so guilty that they turned around and wanted to escape, especially Lan Lan. She had been clamoring to teach Li Yundong a lesson, but at this time, when she saw this ghost-like man in front of her, she immediately pulled Lu Xia and ran away with her heart beating like a drum. Li Yundong saw the two women run away, as if they had seen a ghost. He didn't even have time to say sorry. He sighed and saw that the other party had disappeared around the corner. He shook his head and muttered, "This world is really small." Li Yundong went all the way out of Shiyuan Temple and was in a daze at the gate of the temple. After thinking for a while, he decided to start searching from a nearby place, so he returned to Shantang and kept searching back and forth. After searching like this for a few hours, Li Yundong, who had lost all hope, was about to leave. Only then did he find a very familiar figure flashing in the corner of the street not far away. The girl was about 165 meters tall and had a slim figure. Her black hair almost fell to her waist, and her slender waist could be held in one hand. Every time she took a step, her playful black hair would jump like an elf. As soon as Li Yundong saw this figure, his heart shook, and he quickly followed her. But after the big mistake in Shiyuan Temple, he didn't dare to do it again. He just followed behind the girl for a few hundred meters, until the girl stood in front of a sesame seed cake stall. She turned around and revealed a charming and beautiful face. Li Yundong's mind buzzed, and his chest felt like it was about to explode with joy. He saw that the girl was looking at the sesame seed cake stall eagerly. She wanted to eat it, but she seemed to have no money to buy it. She was drooling, and her expression was lovable. Who else could it be but Su Chan? Chapter 279. Go to watch net. Li Yundong suddenly saw Su Chan not far away from him. He was so happy that he couldn't control himself. There seemed to be a crazy voice shouting in his mind, "Little girl, this is my little girl. I will never let her leave my side again." Li Yundong only felt that he was quietly watching Su Chan from the side, and all the pores on his body were cheering and singing loudly. His whole body was filled with an indescribable joy and happiness. Watch net. 7K. OM. We haven't seen each other for so long. Should I go up and give her a warm hug? Or should he give her a passionate kiss? Or is it just a peaceful greeting? Li Yundong's mind was in turmoil. While he was hesitating, he saw the owner of the sesame seed cake stall speak to Su Chan. "One by one. I'll cut off the fake sesame seed cake one by one. It's crispy and crispy. Do you want to try it?" In the face of the owner's enthusiastic greeting in Wunong soft language, Su Chan rubbed her toes against the ground, but her eyes were fixed on the steaming sesame seed cake. She also said in Wunong soft language, "A bundle of season coins?" The boss said with a smile, "A cold one." She stood in front of the sesame seed cake stall, her eyes fixed on the sesame seed cake. She put her hand into her pocket, but didn't take it out. She must be shy. Li Yundong, who was not far away, saw that Su Chan could also speak Wunong soft language and couldn't afford to pay, so he immediately laughed. Just as he was about to step forward, he suddenly saw a young boy suddenly appear beside her and say loudly, "How many sesame seed cakes does this beauty want to buy? How much?" "I paid for her." Su Chan turned her head in surprise and saw a handsome boy smiling at her. Su Chan frowned and snorted coldly. "Can't I afford it?" she said in a loud voice. "You think I can't afford it? Do I need your treat?" After that, she took out 2 coins from her pocket and slapped them on the sesame seed cake stall. She took a sesame seed cake for herself and continued to walk forward. Seeing that Su Chan didn't appreciate his gesture, the boy immediately chased after her again. He smiled apologetically and said, "Hey pretty girl, let's be friends. At least give me your contact information. Cell phone number, QQ number. If that doesn't work, MSN is fine too. Why don't you just tell me your name instead of telling me all of this?" Su Chan stopped in her tracks and yelled at him impatiently. "Aren't you annoying? You've been harassing me for a few days. I've already told you that I have a boyfriend. Stop bothering me." The boy was obviously a veteran in the field of flowers. He shamelessly smiled and said, "I've been paying attention to you for a few days, But I've never seen your boyfriend appear. Beauty, don't try to fool me with this. Look, I've even stopped my travel schedule for the past few days because of you. Isn't that very sincere? At least tell me your name. It's always good to have a few friends in this world. Su-chan covered her ears as she walked faster and faster. You're so annoying. Go away. Go away. Then, she ran towards a small alley in Shanting Town. Shanting Town. Shanting Town. Watch net. The boy chased after her relentlessly. He chased her into an alley, turned a corner, and suddenly found that Su-chan had disappeared. The boy was shocked. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. All he saw were antique brick houses on both sides of the alley. There were no doors, and the alley was very shallow. You could see the end of it at a glance. So there was only a wall, and it was a dead end. He had no idea where Su-chan had gone. Could it be that she's actually a demon? Can she disappear into thin air? The boy scratched his head in a daze, then walked out in a daze. As soon as he walked out, he bumped into someone head-on. The boy felt as if he had hit a wall. The impact almost made him suffocate. He let out a cry and fell backward. It was Li Yundong. Li Yundong wanted to teach the guy who had harassed Su-chan a lesson, so he deliberately pretended not to notice, and bumped into him. He pretended to be surprised and stared at the boy sitting on the ground. He widened his eyes but said nothing. The boy sat on the ground and glared at Li Yundong. Are you blind? He yelled. Can't you see where you're going? Li Yundong didn't know if Su-chan was nearby, but he wanted to give her a surprise. He was afraid that he would startle her if he opened his mouth. So he deliberately blinked and pretended not to hear. He pointed at his ear, then at his mouth, then at his mouth, and then at his hand. The boy crawled to his feet and cursed. Damn it! I can't believe I ran into a mute. Hey, watch where you're going next time. Li Yundong didn't get angry. Instead, he looked at the boy with a smile. As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling face. Seeing that Li Yundong was smiling warmly, the boy didn't say anything more. He walked away, muttering to himself. But every 3 steps he took, he would look back, as if he couldn't understand why Su-chan had disappeared into thin air. Li Yundong waited until the boy's silhouette disappeared out of sight. He looked left and right. Seeing that there was no one around, he jumped up to the roof and started searching for Su-chan. It didn't take long before he found the figure of the little girl walking along the small stone bridge of Shanting 7 miles, eating the sesame seed cake in her hand as she walked. Li Yundong's cultivation could be said to have reached the great success realm, far higher than Su-chan's. He was hanging behind Su-chan, so she didn't notice him at all. She just wandered around Shanting 7 miles to kill time. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. As she walked, she nibbled at the sesame seed cake in her hand. She seemed to be very careful with every bite. She chewed it in her mouth for a long time before swallowing, cherishing it very much. After the little girl finished eating half of the sesame seed cake, she carefully hid the other half of the sesame seed cake in her hand. Then, she sat down on the side of the small bridge, took off her shoes, rolled up her trousers, and put her snow-white feet into the dark green river. As her feet splashed the water, her nose softly hummed an unknown tune. Li Yundong looked behind her, and saw that the little girl was in this antique scenery. There was a small bridge beside her, a weak willow hanging over the river, and behind her were white walls and black tiles, flying eaves and arches. She looked like she was in a painting, and the finishing touch made the ancient scenery in front of her vivid and lively. Li Yundong looked at the little girl from a distance, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help showing a smile, which was as soft as the water grass in the river. The little girl played with the water for a while. Then she bent down and picked up some water. She didn't think it was dirty. She dug some mud beside the willow tree and made a clay figurine. She was clever and dexterous. After a while, she made 2 clay figurines, one big and one small. As she played, she pointed at the small clay figurine and said to herself, "Little girl, you have to be obedient. If you don't, I won't want you." As she said this, she fiddled with the bigger clay figurine and said in a rough voice, "My little girl is the most obedient. Come on, have a bite." I'll make something delicious for you. Su-chan pouted and kissed the back of her hand. Then, she fiddled with the little clay figurine and said pitifully, Sir, I don't have any money to spend. If you don't make something delicious for her, she will starve to death. Li Yundong's heart was filled with tenderness when he heard this. He couldn't help it anymore. He quietly walked behind the little girl and said softly, Little girl, what do you want to eat? Su-chan didn't react for a moment. She tilted her head and thought for a while, then said crisply, I want to eat beer duck. The beer duck you make is the best. Well, I also want to eat cabbage and Christian carp soup. Well, I also want to eat. As she spoke, her body suddenly shook. She turned her head hard and widened her eyes. Su-chan saw an imposing, handsome boy standing behind her. He was looking at her with a smile. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? Su-chan's mouth was wide open, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. The expression on her face changed from shock to ecstasy, from ecstasy to grievance, from grievance to sadness, and finally, from sadness to surprise and worry. She was worried that what she was seeing was fake. She couldn't believe that the Li Yundong standing in front of her was real. She was afraid that this was all an illusion. Su-chan's big eyes were filled with tears. More and more tears flowed down her cheeks. After a while, like a broken string of pearls, the tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the clay figurine in her hands. Sir, Su-chan called out tentatively. Her frightened and surprised look made it seem as if she was afraid that the Li Yundong in front of her would shatter and disappear if she spoke a little louder. Li Yundong suppressed the rolling excitement in his chest. He smiled slightly, opened his arms to the girl. It's me, girl. Don't you recognize me? Su-chan listened to the familiar voice that had haunted her dreams. She no longer had any doubts. She burst into tears and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms. She didn't care that her hands were dirty. She clutched Li Yundong's clothes tightly, as if she was afraid that he would run away and disappear. Su-chan cried her heart out. The lovesickness, grievance, and fear of the past all disappeared at this moment. She hugged Li Yundong tightly, as if she had someone to rely on, and someone who cared about her from now on. Li Yundong lovingly stroked the girl's soft long black hair. He said softly, Well, I'm back. I won't starve to death. Su-chan was crying loudly in Li Yundong's arms. When she heard this, she burst out laughing. She raised her head, her cheeks full of tears, but the corners of her eyes curved into crescent moons. You're so annoying, she said. You're the one who will starve to death. Li Yundong smiled and tapped the girl's nose. Don't quibble. I heard it all just now. How come the little girl has no money to spend? Su-chan blushed and said unwillingly. You heard it all? You're so annoying. You followed me secretly and didn't tell me. Li Yundong laughed and said, Didn't I want to give you a surprise? Girl, how can you not have money? Thinking of this, Su-chan felt sad again, and her tears fell again. Li Yundong quickly wiped away her tears, held her face and kissed her. He pretended to be angry and said, If you cry again, I don't want you anymore. Su-chan quickly wiped away her tears and raised her head, as if she was trying hard to pour the tears back into her eyes. She blinked a few times and felt that she didn't want to cry anymore. Then she lowered her head and said, My master was taken away, and I didn't dare to go to you for fear that I would affect your divine tribulation. So I had to go back to the place where my master used to live. But I don't have much money with me, so I've been hungry these days. Li Yundong was so distressed that he said, Let's go back first. I'll make you delicious food. Where do you live? When Su-chan heard that Li Yundong was going to make delicious food for her, she immediately put aside the sad things. She smiled and nodded vigorously. I'll take you there. After that, she stretched out her hands and said coquettishly, But I want to carry you. Li Yundong loved Su-chan very much. He turned around with a smile, squatted down and said, Come on up. Su-chan was shocked when she saw Li Yundong turn around. Oh, there are two obvious black handprints on Yundong's white shirt. Obviously, they were made by her hands that had just touched the mud. Su-chan's heart skipped a beat. She was afraid that Li Yundong would be angry when he saw them. For a moment, she quickly thought about what she should do. She put her hands behind her back and secretly rubbed them, rubbing the mud in her palms. Seeing that Su Chan didn't move, Li Yundong turned around and said with a smile, "What's wrong? You don't want to carry me? Then walk back by yourself." Su Chan said anxiously, "Of course I will." She didn't care about the black handprints on Li Yundong's body, and jumped onto his back. She wrapped her arms around Li Yundong's neck, but when she saw that her hands were swaying in front of Li Yundong, she was afraid that Li Yundong would notice, so she grabbed the front of Li Yundong's shirt tightly with both hands, leaving 2 big black handprints on his chest. Li Yundong had no idea that he had become a clay figurine at this time. He smiled and put Su Chan on his back. "You've gained weight." Su Chan immediately twisted her body when she heard that. "Who's gained weight? You're the one who's gained weight. I haven't eaten for days. How can I gain weight? You lied to me." Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. "Okay, I'm going to make delicious food for you." As he said that, he walked across the stone bridge with Su Chan on his back. One of them was as strong and handsome as a pine tree, while the other was as soft and charming as a green vine. The 2 figures were tightly pressed against each other. In this ancient landscape painting of a small bridge and flowing water, it was like a golden wind and jade dew meeting, surpassing countless immortal couples in the world. Li Yundong walked across the stone bridge with Su Chan on his back. He suddenly turned around and said softly, "Girl, we'll never be separated again. We'll never let go of each other again, right?" At this time, Su Chan was worried that Li Yundong would lose his temper when he saw her dirty clothes. She rolled her eyes and nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. Her black hands grabbed Li Yundong's clothes even harder. "Yes, I won't let go even if you beat me to death." At the third watch, another 12,000 words burst forth. Chapter 280. Go to see Net. Li Yundong carried Su Chan on his back and walked to the place where she lived. He looked up and saw that it was a brick house with a red wooden door that was tightly shut. It was a house with a small courtyard that was often seen in costume dramas. Go to see Net. 7K. OM. Even though Su Chan was already home, she still refused to get off Li Yundong's back. "Just push the door open," she said. "You didn't lock the door?" Li Yundong asked in confusion. "Aren't you afraid of thieves?" He pushed the wooden door open and walked into the house with a squeak. There was a small vegetable garden in the yard. It was about 10 square meters. Further inside was a bungalow with 5 rooms. In the middle was the living room, where there was only a square table and 2 stools. Other than that, there was nothing else. Li Yundong walked around the living room with the girl on his back and said with a wry smile, "The thief came here for nothing. You don't even have a single electrical appliance in your house." Then he patted the girl's butt and said, "Come on down. How long do you want to stay here?" Su Chan twisted her body and said coquettishly, "I want to stay here for the rest of my life." Although she said that, she obediently climbed down. Li Yundong smiled and looked at the 2 bedrooms on the left and right. "Which is your room?" Su Chan pointed to the one on the right. "Where's the kitchen?" Li Yundong asked. Su Chan pointed to a small room next to the living room. Li Yundong nodded. He walked into the kitchen and took a look. Suddenly, he sucked in a breath of cold air. "Wow! And it's a firewood stove. This is too retro and non-mainstream." Li Yundong looked around with a wry smile. There were carrots, sweet potatoes, corn, and other vegetables in the room that were not easy to spoil. He smiled. "You have some food here. Why don't you make your own food? You'd rather starve my girl. Be careful, or I'll punish you." Su Chan took Li Yundong's hand and said coquettishly, "You told me not to cook." Only then did Li Yundong remember that he had once told the little girl not to cook when she was alone. He couldn't help laughing. "That also depends on the situation. Otherwise, will you starve to death?" Su Chan giggled. "I knew you would come to save me. You wouldn't let me starve to death." Li Yundong scratched the little girl's nose with a smile and said, "Is there a place selling vegetables nearby?" Su Chan thought for a moment and said, Yes, but it will take a while. Li Yundong smiled and said, then I'll go buy some vegetables. Will you wait for me here? Su Chan clung to his arm tightly. No, I want to go with you, she said, refusing to budge. Li Yundong didn't want to be separated from the girl for even a second, so he smiled and said, okay, let's go together. With that, the two of them didn't even lock the door. They just closed it a little and went out again. Li Yundong and Su Chan walked on the street like a conjoined body. Along the way, many people looked at them in surprise, especially many people who glanced at the two black handprints in front of Li Yundong, secretly covering their mouths and laughing. Li Yundong thought they were laughing because of Su Chan's cute appearance, so he didn't take it seriously. Su Chan, on the other hand, had a guilty conscience. When she saw the people in front of her, she had an idea. She went around to Li Yundong's front to block everyone's view. When they turned around to the back, she went around to Li Yundong's back to block their view. She was busy spinning around Li Yundong like a spinning top. Li Yundong saw her running around like a busy bee, so he smiled and said, what are you running around for? My eyes are dazzled by you. Su Chan giggled and said, nothing. Li Yundong saw that all the tourists in Shantung were looking at him. He couldn't help but ask curiously, why are they looking at me? Is there something on my face? Su Chan was shocked, but she smiled dryly and said, nothing, nothing. You're the most handsome man. How could there be flowers? Saying this, she urged Li Yundong to hurry up and said, I'm starving. Let's go buy some food. Li Yundong didn't suspect anything. He smiled and went to a nearby small market with Su Chan, bought some food, and then prepared to go home. On the way home, they suddenly met the boy who had been pestering Su Chan before. Li Yundong glanced at him faintly and didn't say anything. He walked over with Su Chan, who deliberately held Li Yundong's arm tightly to show off, and made a face at the boy. The boy stared blankly at Su Chan and Li Yundong as they left. He was so angry that smoke was coming out of his nostrils. Damn it! All the good cabbages have been taken by pigs. Is this beauty blind? How could she be with a mute? This mute was still wearing such dirty clothes. Damn it, what kind of world is this? She doesn't even want to be with a handsome, rich man like me, and run away to be with such a thing. Is there any justice in this world? Is there any law in this world? Li Yundong didn't know that someone was criticizing him behind his back. He took Su Chan back to the place where he lived. He quickly made 2 dishes and a soup in the kitchen, and then brought them to the square table. The two of them sat facing each other. Su Chan held the hot rice bowl in her hand and looked at the steaming soup in front of her. For a moment, she felt warm in her heart. She stretched her head and opened her mouth smiling. I want you to feed me soup, she said. Li Yundong smiled and scooped up a spoonful of soup. He blew on it, then moved closer to Su Chan's mouth and said, Okay. I'll feed you like this for the rest of your life. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt sad, and tears fell from her eyes again, dripping into the soup spoon. Li Yundong smiled. Why are you crying again? Are you thinking about your master again? Don't worry, I will definitely help you find her. Su Chan shook her head and wiped away her tears. No, I believe you can find her. I am just too happy. Li Yundong smiled and said, drink the soup while it's hot. Su Chan stuck out her bright red tongue and licked it. She smacked her lips and said, it's salty. You put too much salt in it. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and said, nonsense. It's clear that your tears just now made the soup salty. Su Chan giggled, opened her mouth, and swallowed the spoon in one gulp. When she opened her mouth again, she said with a smile, it's sweet. Li Yundong saw that she was obviously talking nonsense, so he immediately laughed. He also opened his mouth, stood up, leaned his upper body forward slightly, and said, I fed you. It's your turn to feed me. Su Chan also took a spoonful of soup and stood up to feed it to Li Yundong. But as soon as the soup reached Li Yundong's mouth, her eyes fell on the 2 dazzling black handprints in front of Li Yundong's body. Her heart trembled, and her hand tilted, causing the soup to spill towards Li Yundong's mouth. Li Yundong curled his mouth and wanted to catch it, but it still spilled all over his body. He quickly stood up and lowered his head to pat the soup off his body. But as soon as he lowered his head, he suddenly took a deep breath. Oh my God, I've been hit by the Tantric Mahamudra. Li Yundong didn't even need to think to know that it must be the work of the little girl. He raised his head helplessly and said with a drawl, Su-chan. Seeing that she couldn't hide it any longer, the little girl walked over with her head down. She grabbed the corner of her clothes and said pitifully, I'm sorry. I was too excited just now, so I dirtied your clothes. It's no big deal. I'll wash them for you. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing when he saw the little girl's pitiful appearance. He pinched her nose with his hand and said, Let's eat first. Su-chan was delighted and raised her head. Don't you need me to wash them? Li Yundong scolded with a smile. Only after eating will you have the strength to wash them. Su-chan's face suddenly fell. Oh, she obediently sat down at the table and began to eat. At first she wolfed down her food. Li Yundong really couldn't stand it anymore. So he tapped Su-chan's bowl with his chopsticks and scolded her with a smile. Are you a reincarnated hungry ghost? Eat slowly, chew carefully and swallow slowly. You're a cultivator. Su-chan nodded again and said dryly, You sound like my master. Li Yundong smiled and said, Really? Whether it's from the point of view of you being my girlfriend, or from the point of view of the Fox Zen school, you should listen to me. Su-chan blinked in confusion. Why do you say that? Li Yundong smiled and said, Because I'm now the leader of the Fox Zen school. Su-chan was stunned. Her cherry mouth opened wider and wider, forming an O shape. She said, Yundong, you're not kidding, are you? Li Yundong said with a smile. Of course not. You eat first. After eating and washing the clothes, I'll tell you slowly. Su-chan was so curious that she couldn't wait to finish eating immediately. She took another big bite. Li Yundong immediately tapped her bowl with his chopsticks and shouted, Eat slowly. Only then did Su-chan start to chew slowly like a lady. After she finished eating, she cleverly cleaned up the bowls on the table. Li Yundong had nothing to do, so he walked to Su-chan's room. There was only a mahogany table and an antique mahogany bed in the room. The bed was covered with soft bedding, and there were writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones on the table. Li Yundong walked to the table and saw a stack of rice paper under the paperweight. There was a line of small seal characters written on the rice paper. Li Yundong picked it up and looked at it. He suddenly smiled and recited loudly, Fine clouds play tricks, flying stars pass hate. Silver river passes in the dark. When the golden wind and jade do meet, it is better than countless things in the world. Tenderness is like water. A good night is like a dream. Forgetting the magpie bridge to return home. If two people love each other for a long time, why do they sleep on the bed? After he finished reciting, he laughed loudly and picked up the brush next to him. He added, Fine clouds play tricks, flying stars pass hate. Silver river passes in the dark. When the golden wind and jade do meet, it is better than adultery. Tenderness is like water. A good night is like a dream. Forgetting the magpie bridge to return home. If two people love each other for a long time, why do they sleep on the bed? Haha, this is how it should be. Li Yundong amused himself by ruining Qin Guan's, the immortal at the magpie bridge. He turned to the next page and saw that it was Yuan Haowen's famous line. He read, What is love in the world? Before he could finish reading, Su-chan rushed into the room and threw herself at him, blushing. She grabbed the piece of paper in his hand and yelled, Don't read it. Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me. Li Yundong laughed until she snatched the poem manuscript away. Su-chan's face turned red from Li Yundong's laughter. She was so embarrassed that she stamped her feet and said angrily, Don't read it. Give it to me. Give it to me. How dare you laugh? Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, Okay, I won't laugh. Hurry up and wash my clothes. Su-chan blushed and reached out her hand. Take off your clothes. Li Yundong took off his clothes. As he did so, he shook his head and recited, Ask the world what is love. It makes people want to take off their pants. After that, he handed the clothes to Su-chan with a straight face and asked, "Do you want me to take off my pants?" Su-chan giggled, but her face quickly turned serious again. She snatched his shirt and pounced on him. "I want you to take it off. I want you to take it off. I'll bite you to death." Li Yundong laughed out loud. She pounced on him, and he fell backwards onto the mahogany bed behind him. The two of them rolled around in a ball, laughing and playing for a while. Li Yundong felt like he was hugging a beautiful woman. Su-chan's delicate face was right in front of him, within reach. Her bright red lips were delicate and tender, like jelly strawberries. Without thinking, he lowered his head and kissed her. But just as he was about to kiss her, he suddenly heard a series of knocks on the door. "Is anyone home? Is anyone home? // 7854627895541. Chapter 281. Go to watch net. As soon as Li Yundong heard the voice, he jumped up from the bed angrily and said, "Which B*** is disturbing me at this time? Someone drag him out and shoot him for 5 minutes." Su-chan giggled on the bed and said, "This is called God has eyes. God won't let you do bad things." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and said, "B***, I'm your leader. How dare you not speak up for me? I'll take off my clothes and pants." Su-chan laughed so hard that she rolled on the bed like a gourd. "You've already taken off your clothes. Do you want to take off your pants again? Be careful that others see you like this. They'll laugh at the leader of the Fox Zen school for not being decent." Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. "Apart from the cultivation world, who knows that I'm the leader of the Fox Zen school?" While the two of them were whispering to each other, they heard the knocking on the door getting louder and louder. A woman shouted, "Is there anyone here?" Li Yundong winked at Su-chan and gestured at himself. "Hey, do you want the leader of the Fox Zen school to go out to meet the guests with his shirt off? Hurry up and get a set of clothes." Su-chan looked embarrassed. "But we don't have men's clothes here. Go to watch net. 7K. OM. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Then give me those dirty clothes. I'll make do with them." Su-chan suddenly thought of something and ran into Ao Wushuang's room. After a while, she took out a set of clothes and brought them to Li Yundong. Li Yundong looked at it and was immediately amused. He saw that it was a large Taoist robe. Li Yundong took it and put it on. It fit him well. He immediately bowed his head and said seriously, "Amateus, fellow Taoist, please lead the way." Su-chan giggled and returned the salute seriously. "Yes, leader." The two of them looked at each other and smiled, then wanted to go outside. When Li Yundong walked outside, he saw a woman dressed in branded clothes knocking on the brass ring on the door impatiently. "Hello, how can I help you?" Li Yundong asked politely. The woman was about 40 years old and had heavy makeup on her face. She was carrying a small bag in her hand. As soon as she saw Li Yundong, she was stunned and secretly cheered in her heart. What a handsome and heroic Taoist. It's a pity that he has become a monk. Seeing that Li Yundong was extraordinary and handsome, her previous anger dissipated a little. She lowered her voice and said, "I'm looking for Miss Ning Wushuang." "Ning Wushuang?" Li Yundong was stunned. Su-chan reacted quickly and whispered in his ear, "It's my master." Her original name was Ning Wushuang, and later she changed her name to Ao Wushuang. Li Yundong reacted and smiled. "Ning Wushuang isn't here right now. You can tell me if there's anything." The woman looked him up and down from head to toe. "You can make decisions? Who are you to her?" When Su-chan saw the doubt in her eyes, she said loudly, "This is our sect leader. Ning Wushuang is my master. She has to bow and greet the sect leader." "Leader?" The expression on the middle-aged woman's face suddenly became very strange. She thought to herself, could he be the leader in the costume drama? Li Yundong chuckled and said, "If you have anything to say, you can tell me. I can more or less make some decisions." The middle-aged woman saw that Li Yundong was calm and composed when he spoke. Although he looked young, he had a temperament like a pine tree when he stood there. He was extraordinary, like a deep pool and a high mountain. He was indeed like a leader, who was used to storms, and could control the situation. The middle-aged woman retracted her contemptuous and suspicious gaze. She nodded, took out a contract with a few pages from the small bag in her hand, and said, "Then I'll be straightforward. 2 years ago, Ning Wushuang rented this house from me for 2 years. Today is exactly 2 years. I wanted to call Miss Ning Wushuang, but unfortunately, I couldn't get in touch with her, so I had to come here." Li Yundong muttered in his heart. Is there such a coincidence? The contract is up today. She just happened to come here when I was making out with that girl. The middle-aged woman handed the contract over and said, "Take a look at it yourself." Li Yundong took the contract and glanced at it. Sure enough, it was today. He smiled bitterly in his heart, but he still said politely, "You came today to ask if we would like to renew the contract, right?" The middle-aged woman nodded and said, "Yes, if we renew the contract, the rent may be raised a little. You know, everything has been rising recently, and this place is in a prime location, so you know." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan and asked her with his eyes, which meant, "Do you want to renew the contract for your master?" Before Su Chan could speak, she heard a boy next to her say loudly, "I'll rent it, I'll rent it." Li Yundong and Su Chan turned their heads, and saw that it was the boy who had pestered Su Chan before. They didn't know which corner he had come out from, but they didn't know where he had come from. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other, then at each other. Su Chan whispered, "Yundong, this guy is so annoying. He's been following me like sticky candy for several days." Li Yundong smiled and whispered to her, "It's okay. It's not like I haven't met this kind of rich guy before." After that, he winked at her. Su Chan burst into laughter. She remembered the scene when Li Yundong teased Lu Chuan. So she calmed down and waited for the show to start. The boy saw that Li Yundong and Su Chan were so intimate, and didn't take him seriously at all. He became more and more jealous. He said rudely to Li Yundong, "Hey, aren't you mute?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "When did I say that I was mute?" The boy said angrily, "Then why didn't you speak at that time?" "Why are you still pretending?" Li Yundong chuckled. "I was holding something in my mouth, so it was inconvenient. Besides, if you're mute if you don't speak, then you're a chatterbox now, aren't you?" Su Chan immediately giggled. Even the middle-aged woman who was watching from the side had a smile on her face. The boy was so angry that his face turned red. He turned his head and said to the middle-aged woman, "How much is your house for a year? I'll rent it to you." The middle-aged woman looked the boy up and down. She saw that he was wearing expensive branded clothes, and his tone was even more frightening. She knew that he was most likely a rich second generation. She smiled and said, "When Miss Ning Wushuang signed with me, there was a clause in the contract that if the price was negotiated, she would have the priority to sign the contract." She said this politely, but her next words revealed the nature of a businesswoman. "But if you offer a higher price, I naturally won't refuse." When the boy heard this, he immediately became arrogant and raised his head provocatively at Li Yundong. Li Yundong didn't get angry. He smiled at the middle-aged woman and said, "How much is the rent a year?" The middle-aged woman stretched out a finger. 100,000. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. Before he could finish speaking, the middle-aged woman quickly said, "That was the price 2 years ago. This year's price is 150,000. Li Yundong took a deep breath and thought to himself, "Oh my God, she's robbing me." Although this house is a little old, it's located in a tourist attraction and has its own courtyard. It's indeed worth so much money, but how can I have so much money to rent this house now? While he was thinking, the boy next to him rushed to say, 150,000, right? Okay, I'll rent it. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. Since I'm now the leader of the Fox Zen school, I should have some money, right? I should be able to afford it, right? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, 150,000 is fine. I'm willing to rent it. Seeing that Li Yundong had agreed, the boy immediately said, I'll pay 200,000. Li Yundong said calmly, then I'll also pay 200,000. The boy said proudly, I'll pay 500,000. His words were full of the aura of a rich second generation. At this time, Li Yundong had already given up renting the house. No matter how rich the Fox Zen school was, it couldn't be wasted like this. It was a house, so it didn't matter where he rented it. However, he wanted to make things difficult for the boy, so he smiled and said, "Then I'll also pay 500,000. Seeing that Li Yundong was bickering with him, the boy couldn't help but shout angrily, "I'll pay 1 million. Li Yundong saw that the veins on his forehead were bulging. It was obvious that he had made up his mind. If Li Yundong continued to provoke him, the guy might give up. He shook his head and deliberately pretended to sigh. He said to Su Chan, "I'm sorry, I don't have that much money. I can't rent it." Su Chan was clever and clever. She said with a sad face, "Then what should we do?" The boy snorted and sneered. "Dude, don't pick up girls if you don't have money these days." Su Chan made a face at him and said, "Bah, you haven't rented it yet. What are you so proud of?" The boy sneered and took out a checkbook from his arms. He quickly wrote a string of numbers, signed his name, and waved it in front of the middle-aged woman. "Where's the contract?" The middle-aged woman hadn't expected that the two boys' jealousy would benefit her. The rent of the house had been 150,000 yuan a year, but it had been raised to 1 million. She was so happy that her eyes were about to disappear. She quickly took out a folded contract from her bag and signed it, fearing that the boy would go back on his word. After the boy signed the contract, he laughed and said, "This place is mine from now on. Hey beauty, if you want to live here, I have no problem with it, but as for you." As he said this, he looked Li Yundong up and down and said disdainfully, "Forget it. I don't welcome you." Li Yundong deliberately sighed and said, "Girl, I've been driven away. What are you going to do?" Su Chan smiled without hesitation and said, "Of course I'll go with my master." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Well, we don't have much luggage anyway. Let's go." Then he took Su Chan's hand and started to walk away. The boy next to her was dumbfounded. He stopped Su Chan and asked, "Hey beauty, you don't live here?" Su Chan blinked at him strangely. "I used to live here but not now." "You can live here," the boy said anxiously. "I have no problem with it." Su Chan waved at him and said crisply, "You're such a strange person. Of course I'll go with my boyfriend. Wherever he goes I'll go. Even if he has to live on the streets, I'll follow him. But you're blind. My boyfriend is a great man. And you actually showed off in front of him. You're like a mayfly trying to shake a tree. Ridiculous. Forget it, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm leaving. Don't follow me anymore, or I'll make you pay." After that, she shook her fist at him and made a face at him. Li Yundong tried to hold back his laughter and sighed deliberately. Alas, it's not good for people to be too charming. Even if they're poor and have nothing, there are still beautiful women willing to follow them. Don't you think so, girl? Su Chan looked up with a smile and said sweetly, "Yes, master." After that, Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. "Let's go. We're going to live on the streets." Su Chan giggled and wrapped her arms around Li Yundong's arm. She followed him step by step, her face full of happiness and sweetness. The boy was dumbfounded. His eyes stared straight ahead and he said, "Are these two retarded?" Is there something wrong with this beauty's brain? She looks so beautiful. What's wrong with her brain? The middle-aged woman put away the contract and said, "There's nothing wrong with their brains. I've seen countless people, but I've never seen such a dignified and elegant boy. Look at how miserable he is. Hey, he must be a great man. I think you've made a mistake." The boy immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. He tore the contract in his hand frantically, grabbed the middle-aged woman's collar, and roared, "Give me back my check. I don't want to rent it anymore." Although the middle-aged woman was threatened, she was still calm. She sneered and said, "The contract has been signed in duplicate. It's written in black and white. Do you still want to deny it?" The boy grinned hideously and said, "Bitch, don't think that I'm easy to bully. Go and find out my name. How dare you cheat me of my money? Are you tired of living?" The middle-aged woman didn't react for a moment and said loudly, "Both of us were willing. I didn't cheat you." Shinyu slapped her and said, "If I say you're lying, then you're lying. You're playing tricks on me. You're tired of living. Why don't you go and find out my name?" After being slapped, the middle-aged woman suddenly reacted. She covered her face, her eyes flashing with hatred. But she asked, "Who is Shen Wangkai in Tianan City to you?" Shinyu snorted and said, "He's my father." "What's wrong? Are you afraid?" The middle-aged woman took a deep breath, forced a smile and said, "So it's the young master of the Shin family. Why didn't you say so earlier?" She took out the check from her bag and handed it back. Then, she tore the contract in her hand and said with a smile, "It's really a flood against the temple of the Dragon King. Wouldn't it have been fine if you had said so earlier?" Shinyu looked at her coldly and took the check. "At least you know what's good for you. Hey, let me ask you, do you know the name of that woman just now?" The middle-aged woman shook her head and said, "I don't know." Shinyu scolded, "Your landlord doesn't know the name of the tenant? Are you kidding me? No wonder you're still doing such a small business at such an old age. You deserve it." He turned his head in the direction of their departure and spat fiercely. "I'll find you sooner or later." After that, he walked away quickly. The middle-aged woman waited for him to walk away, before showing a fierce look in her eyes. She spat fiercely and said, "Bah, you want to fight with him? You're not even as good as a hair on his head. Who do you think you are? You're so arrogant because of your father. Sooner or later, you'll get your retribution." Li Yundong didn't know that so many things had happened after he left. After walking for a while with Su Chan, she looked up at him and asked, "Yundong, where are we going?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Of course we're going back to the Fox Zen school." "I'll tell you what happened on the way." Su Chan smiled happily and said, Okay, but I want to carry you on my back." As she spoke, she jumped onto Li Yundong's back. Li Yundong smiled lovingly and said, "You want me to carry you to Mount Tianlong?" Su Chan giggled and said, "I want you to carry me for the rest of your life. Will you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay, I'll carry you." The two of them talked and laughed, and their backs stretched out on the street, as if they were one person. //7854627895541. Chapter 282. Go to watch net. Dongwu City was not far from Mount Tianlong, but Li Yundong walked all the way with Su Chan on his back. As they walked, they talked about recent things. The two of them were so intimate that they refused to let go of each other for even a second. They walked until it was dark before they reached the foot of the mountain. Watch net. Su Chan listened to Li Yundong talk about how he had reached the Zhuji phase, how he had cultivated his Shintong, and how he had passed the divine tribulation. When she heard the tense parts, Su Chan couldn't help but widen her eyes and hold her breath. Especially when Li Yundong said that as soon as he had reached the Zhuji phase, he had met Wu Hao and LV Fengping of the Yin Yang sect of Mount Wuhua, who had tried to snatch the fan of 7 treasures. Su Chan was so angry that she shouted, "Damn it! They should be killed. How dare they bully the few and rob the fan of 7 treasures?" Li Yundong chuckled and continued to talk about how he had passed the heavenly tribulation. Su Chan sighed and said, "Jinren Ziyuan must have put in a lot of effort to help you pass the heavenly tribulation. It's a pity that Master was captured at that time. Otherwise, she would have come to help you cross the heavenly tribulation." Li Yundong also sighed and nodded. "Yes, I owe her too much. I'll find a chance to repay her in the future." Then he talked about how he had defeated the masters of various sects in the Fox Zen school of Mount Tianlong. The thrilling and exciting part of it made the little girl's eyes widen, as if she had been there herself. Su Chan waited for Li Yundong to finish speaking. In the end, he had defeated Ziyuan, and all the sects had retreated. She looked at Li Yundong with admiration and sighed. "Yundong, when you hadn't officially cultivated, I thought that you would definitely become a great hero in the future. Now it seems that I was right." Li Yundong turned around with a smile and pinched the little girl's nose. Yes, it's mainly because my little girl has a good eye for heroes. That's why I, a little boy, can change from a useless otaku to the current leader of the Fox Zen school. Su-chan giggled, her expression full of pride. She suddenly asked, Yundong, do you think Shinran Ziyuan deliberately let you win in the end? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, It's possible. Ziyuan's cultivation is not only profound, but also extensive. I was very afraid of her magic cultivation, and wanted to decide the outcome of the battle by close combat. But I didn't expect that she was also very good at martial arts. Her 8 trigrams palm was extremely wonderful. Su-chan smiled and said, Haven't you heard of the 10 Daos, 9 doctors and the 10 Daos, 9 martial arts? Which cultivator did not know how to treat illnesses? Which cultivator did not know martial arts? The only difference was that there was a difference in strength. For an inner disciple like Taoist Ziyuan, she had been nourished by medicinal pills since she was in her mother's womb. When she was born, she was bathed in medicinal water and began to practice martial arts at the age of 5. Watch net. Li Yundong nodded and said, Now that I think about my duel with Zhang Tianhe, I also feel that there was a lot of luck involved. If I were to fight him again, it's hard to say who would win. Su-chan lay on Li Yundong's shoulder and said shyly, Yundong, you are now the leader of our Fox Zen school. What will you do in the future? When are you going to look for my master? Li Yundong pondered for a while and said, I think your master's matter will probably fall on Ziyuan in the end. After all, she is Yanfang's Shiji. Let's see if Ziyuan can be a peacemaker. Su-chan was lost in thought when she heard this. She said, I really didn't expect that master, Wang Yuanshan, the leader of the Linggong sect, and Yanfang, Wang Yuanshan's shimi, would have such a complicated relationship. Yanfang is too tolerant and vicious. She actually sneaked into our Fox Zen school as a spy for nearly 9 years and plotted to destroy our Fox Zen school. Such scheming and means are too terrifying. Li Yundong also sighed and said, Love, this word can make people obsessed and crazy. Yanfang has already walked the devil's path. I hope she will turn back as soon as possible. Alas, I wonder how Ziyuan is doing now. The two of them talked and walked. They had already walked halfway up the mountain and were about to see the gate of the Fox Zen school. Li Yundong patted Su-chan's buttocks and said, Come down. You are about to enter the Taoist school. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? Su-chan giggled. I'm not afraid. But she obediently climbed down. She looked around, sniffed, and said, There's a strong smell of blood here. Li Yundong sighed and said, The major sects fought and killed a lot of people. Many people of the Fox Zen school died, and many people of the major sects also died. At this time, Su-chan suddenly tilted her head and said, I seem to hear someone singing an opera? Li Yundong was stunned. Opera? Don't joke around. It's 1 or 2 o'clock in the middle of the night. Who would be singing in the mountains? Could it be that the ghosts of the dead are still lingering around? You can't scare me. Su-chan smiled and said, That's right. You are now a famous figure in the cultivation world. Why would you be afraid of these ghosts? But I did hear someone singing an opera. Foxes were born with sharp 5 senses, far better than humans. Li Yundong listened attentively and heard a faint sound of opera coming from the distance. Go to see the net. 7K. Oh dash. Li Yundong had a strange look on his face. What's going on? He and Su-chan looked at each other and said, Let's go and have a look. The two of them ran all the way. When they arrived at the gate of the Taoist temple, they directly flew in without pushing the door open. As soon as they entered, Li Yundong heard the sound of an opera. A woman was singing an opera. Li Yundong couldn't hear the lyrics clearly, but he could vaguely tell that it was quite lively. Li Yundong felt more and more strange. He didn't know what had happened to the Fox Zen school. He made a silent gesture to Su-chan, and the two of them hid in the darkness, holding their breath and quietly moving forward. They went all the way to the lobby of the Taoist temple, and saw that a stage had been set up in the Inyang Taoist field, where Li Yundong had fought against the heroes before. On the stage, a woman in costume was singing. Below the stage, A group of people were playing jinghu, eru, banhu jibin bowls and drums. Li Yundong looked over and felt that the woman singing on the stage was a little familiar. He couldn't help asking in a low voice in surprise, "Who is this woman? Why does she look a little familiar?" Su Chan's eyes widened as she said, "Isn't that my sixth Sherbua Chao Yi?" Li Yundong was shocked. In his impression, Chao Yi, the sixth Sherbua of the Fox Zen school, was dignified and steady. She was a person who could be entrusted with important things. But at this time, the sect had suddenly changed. How could she put on a costume and sing? This is too funny, isn't it? Li Yundong saw that the beautiful and dignified sixth Sherbua, Chao Yi, was walking on the stage as smoothly as water, and her sleeves were like clouds in mist. She had a profound foundation. Even if she was not a professional, she was still a veteran fan. Chao Yi waved her sleeves on the stage and covered her face with them. She sighed and sang, "Crying husband, you are a short-lived ghost. You don't know how to cheat others, but you do know how to cheat your wife. We have the heart to protect your little girl, but there is no one in your family who can do anything. The mother-in-law is always looking for trouble, and the sister-in-law likes to scold people. The old man is 60 years old this year. I eat oranges, and he peels them for me. I thought to myself that there was nothing else to do at such an old age, but I never thought that he would be born with no future. If it weren't for the fact that we knew, my enemy, you would have been cuckolded after you died." This part of the opera was sung with a long and clear voice. Li Yundong could hear it clearly. He suddenly took a deep breath, and the corners of his eyes twitched. He said, Isn't this the little widow visits the grave? Why is she singing this play at this time? This is too unreliable." Su Chan pointed to the troupe below the stage and suddenly said, "Isn't that my third Sherbua Zhuang Yiting, fourth Sherbua Zhang Sunhong, and fifth Sherbua Lu Yuahong?" Li Yundong looked over and saw a few women in Taoist robes sitting in the troupe. They were Zhuang Yiting, Zhang Sunhong, and Lu Yuahong. One of them was playing the jinghu, one was beating the clapboard, and the other was beating the drum. When they saw Chao Yi singing the best part, they even cheered and shook their heads, looking very intoxicated. At this time, Li Yundong's mind was completely in a mess. He said, What the hell is going on?" He was in a daze when he saw that Chao Yi had already finished singing. There was a burst of cheers and applause below the stage. A young disciple of the Fox Zen school said loudly, "Sixth Sherbua, your singing is getting better and better." On the stage, Chao Yi covered her face with her sleeves and smiled, flirting with the female disciples below the stage. Her eyes narrowed. She pointed softly and said coquettishly, "You devil." There was a burst of laughter below the stage. Li Yundong almost fainted when he saw this scene. Just as he was about to go out and ask what was going on, he saw third Sherbua Zhuang Yiting stand up and say, "Let's stop here. It's time to burn paper money for master." She was quite tall, about 1.78 meters. Her voice was neutral, and her words were convincing. After Zhuang Yiting finished speaking, the people below and below the stage immediately agreed. They took off their costumes one after another, put on their Taoist robes and came to the side of the stage. Only then did Li Yundong notice that there was a simple spiritual platform next to the stage. In the middle of the spiritual platform, there was a photo of Lu Yi, the leader of the sect. Under the photo was a coffin with gold threads, and on both sides of the coffin were two large iron buckets. After Chao Yi changed into her Taoist robe, she took all the shiji, shimi, and disciples to the front of the spiritual platform and knelt down neatly. Several senior disciples knelt in the middle and threw the paper money into the sky. Then, all the disciples began to cry loudly. For a moment, the sound of crying was really loud in the Fox Zen school. It was heart-wrenching, and even the little girl's eyes were a little red. After crying for a long time, the paper money was burned out, and Chao Yi said loudly, "Stop." The crying of this group of disciples suddenly stopped. The disciples who had been crying and rolling on the ground immediately got up and returned to the stage. They picked up their musical instruments, and a curious disciple asked, "Hey, what's the next performance?" The disciple who had been asked rolled his eyes and said, "Nonsense, there's no need to ask. We'll watch the door later." After a while, the troop was ready again, and all the disciples of the Fox Zen school took their places. Li Yundong was amazed when he saw them crying and stopping as they pleased. They were even more professional than professional mourners. Just as he was stunned, he saw the door creaking again. This time, it was not Chao Yi who was singing, but fifth Shirbua Lu Yuehong. Chao Yi sat down and played the small drum seriously. Li Yundong's eyes widened as he saw Lu Yuehong singing. I got angry as I talked. The water caltrip fell on the flat slope. After breaking the mirror frame was broken. The oil and powder on my head were splashed down. I can't beat you, so I won't. Second sister, I'm going to do something upstairs. At the end of the song, the people below the stage suddenly joined in and sang, do something, hey hey. Li Yundong suddenly took 3 steps back and almost fainted on the spot. Fortunately, Su Chan supported him, so he didn't fall to the ground. Seeing that Li Yundong had lost his composure, Su Chan couldn't help asking, what are they singing? The corners of Li Yundong's eyes twitched, and he stammered, Wang, Sister Wang misses her husband, / 7854627895541. Chapter 283. Go to watch net. Although Su Chan was inexperienced, she could tell what the play, Wang Erji misses her husband, was just by hearing the name. She immediately said with her eyes wide open, Grandmaster just died. How could they sing this play? This is too reckless, isn't it? Li Yundong took a deep breath. He was already a little unhappy in his heart. No matter what, the Fox Zen school had suddenly undergone a great change. It was fine that these guys didn't observe filial piety, but they actually sang such a vulgar song. It was really hateful. Li Yundong's face darkened and he coughed. His voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by the disciples of the Fox Zen school. Go to watch net. Chao Yi was the most powerful among these people. She immediately shouted in a low voice, who is it? She threw away the things in her hand and jumped in the direction of the voice. Just as she was about to make a move, she suddenly saw Li Yundong looking at her in the darkness. Chao Yi was shocked and immediately stopped. She bowed respectfully and said, Leader. Then she nodded to Su Chan, who was beside Li Yundong with a smile. Li Yundong nodded to her with a sullen face, while Su Chan bowed respectfully to Chao Yi. After returning the greeting, Chao Yi turned around and said to the other disciples who were about to rush over, Don't worry, the leader is back. When the disciples of the Fox Zen school heard that the new leader had returned, they all breathed a sigh of relief and came up to greet Li Yundong. After returning the greetings one by one, Li Yundong waved to them and said, You guys go ahead. Chao Yi, stay here for a moment. I have something to ask you. Chao Yi nodded. After instructing the other disciples to leave, she said respectfully to Li Yundong, Leader, what can I do for you? Li Yundong asked in a deep voice. I didn't want to get involved at first. Moreover, I just took over as the leader of the Fox Zen school, so it can be said that I don't know anything. If it weren't for your repeated requests, I wouldn't have become the leader of the Fox Zen school. But now that I'm the leader, I want to ask, why do you sing such a play in public when the Fox Zen school has suddenly undergone a great change, and the former leader has just passed away? Don't you think it's inappropriate? Chao Yi saw that Li Yundong's face had been sullen, and his eyes were unkind, so she felt a little uneasy. Although Li Yundong was young, he had single-handedly fought against the powerful enemies of all the major sections. All the people of the Fox Zen school had seen this, and they all respected and feared him. Therefore, when Li Yundong pulled a long face, although Chao Yi was older, she felt that this young leader had a dignified aura, which made her feel uneasy and fearful. Watch net. Hearing Li Yundong's words, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, Leader, you don't know. For us cultivators, death is like an extinguished lamp. Once our corporeal body is destroyed, we just need to find a place to bury it. In fact, we don't really care about these funeral matters. It's just that the former sect leader once told us that if he died, we should do as the Romans do, and watch over his spirit for a night, and sing opera for him. Li Yundong frowned and said, "There's no need to sing The Little Widow Visits the Grave and Wang Erji Misses Her Husband." Chow Yi laughed dryly and said, "But the former leader loved this kind of drama the most." Li Yundong suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air, and thought to himself, "If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "So that's how it is. I was wrong about you. However, you have just experienced a fierce battle. Everyone go back to rest." Chow Yi smiled and said, "The sect leader sympathizes with us, so we should respect him. However, the former sect leader gave us an order first. Please forgive us for not respecting him. After all, Master's life is as important as a mountain. I hope the sect leader can understand." Li Yundong sighed and said, "Well, but you should also change to something else. Don't always sing this kind of drama. If it gets out, it will have a bad influence." Chow Yi smiled bitterly and said, "Our Fox Zen school is a hidden sect. Except for Shimi Wushuang, no one else has ever left the mountain. We grew up here, and everything was taught by the sect leader Sherbua, including these plays. We know as many as he teaches us." Li Yundong couldn't help interrupting her. "You mean apart from these plays, you don't know anything else?" Chow Yi nodded vigorously. Li Yundong couldn't help but press his throbbing temples with his hand. With a defeated expression on his face, he said with a wry smile, "Forget it, don't sing anymore. Anyway, you have already sung before. You can keep vigil, and do something else to replace it. What else did the former sect leader like to do when he was alive? You can help him do it." Chow Yi thought for a moment and said, "Okay." After that, she turned around and said loudly, "Attention everyone. The sect leader said that we don't need to sing anymore. Let's do what the former sect leader liked to do when he was alive. It can be considered as helping him keep vigil." The disciples of the Fox Zen school roared in agreement. They quickly dismantled the stage, and then carried out many tables and chairs from the Taoist temple, and placed them in front of the altar. Li Yundong was dumbfounded as he watched them set up tables and chairs, and then spread the wide tablecloth on the table. 2 disciples carried 4 suitcases, and put them on the table. Then, the group of people began to build the Great Wall in high spirits. "Go to see?" Li Yundong asked. "What are they doing?" Chow Yi blinked her eyes and said, "Playing mahjong. The former sect leader liked playing mahjong best." Li Yundong almost fainted. He groaned, covered his eyes with his hand, waved his hand and said, "Forget it, I can't control you. You can do whatever you want." Chow Yi nodded, and was about to turn around to leave, when Li Yundong remembered the trouble he had caused in Shiyuan Temple. He said, "By the way, does the Fox Zen school have any liquid funds now?" Unexpectedly, as soon as Li Yundong mentioned this, Chow Yi immediately poured out her grievances and said, "Oh, sect leader, you've hit the nail on the head. The money of our sect has always been managed by the sect leader. The former sect leader Lu Yi took all the money, but we don't have a penny with us. Let's not talk about other things. Look at this scene. In addition to our own sect's people, there are also some temporarily hired actors from outside. And this stage and platform are all temporarily rented with borrowed money. We haven't paid for them yet." Li Yundong was shocked. "Ah, there are actors on this mountain who can perform as guests? And things like the stage and the altar can be rented?" Chow Yi looked at Li Yundong with a puzzled expression and said, "Mount Tianlong is a tourist attraction. There are many shops nearby, and many of them are Taoist rites. These guys usually act as monks and Taoists when they have nothing to do. Occasionally, they also act as actors." As Chow Yi spoke, she began to complain again. "Oh, sect leader, you don't know how black-hearted these guys are. They charge 500 yuan for the altar and the stage for one night. Isn't this daylight robbery? We usually see them all the time, but they are so black-hearted. How can we have this kind of money?" Li Yundong was dumbfounded when he heard this. What's going on? I wanted to ask them for money, but in the end, I was the one who asked for it. Isn't this too exaggerated?" Chow Yi acted as if she hadn't seen Li Yundong's expression. She sighed and said, Everyone in the Fox Zen school is counting on you now. Don't say anything else, at least pay for the stage and the altar. Li Yundong subconsciously touched his pocket and took out a small stack of red notes. He was afraid of being poor and always carried them with him for self-defense. He thought to himself, after all, I'm the leader of the Fox Zen school, so I can't be too stingy. Anyway, I don't have much money, so I'll just pay it first and get it back later. Chowie was overjoyed to take the money. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, she suddenly thought of something. She turned around and said, by the way, sect leader, you might as well go to the room of the former sect leader Lu Yi. All the money of our Fox Zen school is kept by him. He usually keeps a list in his bookshelf. Sect leader, you'll know when you see it. Only then did Li Yundong feel relieved. He thought to himself, fortunately there are assets left behind. Otherwise, on the first day of this inexplicable sect leader, I would have lost a lot of money. That would have been very depressing. Not to mention anything else. If I were to support more than a dozen people, I would be poor. Li Yundong waved his hand at Chao Yi and said, I see. You go ahead. I'll go to the study of the former sect leader myself. Chao Yi turned around and left with a smile. As soon as she walked into the Taoist field, she saw the other disciples of the sect shouting at her. Chao Yi Sherbua, come here quickly. We need one more. Chao Yi immediately ran over excitedly, sat down, and began to build the Great Wall with great proficiency. After grabbing a few cards, she laughed loudly, pushed the cards and shouted, draw yourself 3 yuan, mix 1 color. Give me money, give me money. Li Yundong stared blankly and thought to himself, she won't use the money I gave her to play cards, will she? Didn't she say that they had no money? While he was thinking, he heard the other disciples crying and shouting, 6 Sherbua, aren't you being too cruel? Where do we get the money to give you? Chao Yi stood up, waved the money in her hand and said, well, the sect leader is kind and has specially given us money. Take it and use it first. These female disciples were immediately overjoyed. They rushed forward and distributed all the money. Then, they cupped their hands and thanked Li Yundong from afar. Li Yundong was already dumbfounded. Seeing them salute him and thank him, he had no choice but to force a smile and return the salute with a dry smile. Seeing him like this, Su Chan, who was standing to one side, wanted to laugh but didn't dare. She lowered her head, but her shoulders kept shaking. Li Yundong had been completely defeated by the guys of the Fox Zen school. He pretended to be angry and glared at Su Chan. Laugh your ass. So this is your Fox Zen school? What kind of people are they? Each one is more unreliable than the other. Su Chan giggled and said, it's useless for you to criticize me. I left the sect when I was very young. After returning to the Fox Zen school, I didn't go out at all. How would I know what the Sherbas and Sherbas are like? Li Yundong rubbed his temples and turned to walk toward the backyard of the Taoist temple. But after walking for a while, he heard Chao Yi laugh again. Nonsense, it's all the same kind of self-groping. Give me money. The disciples of the other 3 families complained. 6 Sherbua, you're cheating. Why is it all the same kind of big 3 yuan? And all the same kind of self-groping? That's right. Besides, how can I give you money for this whole note? Are you an idiot? Can't you use scissors to cut it up and give it to me bit by bit? Hey, 3rd Shiji is really smart. Good idea. Li Yundong almost staggered. He turned around abruptly, his face full of rage. He wanted to shout, smart my ass. That's money. Do you think it's paper chips? As soon as his words reached his throat, he heard Chao Yi yell, you are all idiots. Can money be cut? Can it still be used if it's cut? Can't you use the branch as a bargaining chip? We'll settle the score after the fight. The other disciples immediately smiled and praised. 6 Sherbua is really smart. Good idea, good idea. Li Yundong swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and looked at the smart disciples of the Fox Zen school speechlessly. He shook his head and turned to continue walking inside. But after a few steps, he heard the female disciple who had said that she would cut the banknotes say loudly, ha ha ha, Tianhu, 6th martial uncle. No matter how great your great 3 primordial purity is, it can't compare to my heavenly beard. Give me money. The other 3 all cursed. Tianhu? I'm a 9-tailed celestial fox. Do you think you're a mystical silver fox? B** starred, you actually lost everything. We have no money. What should we do? Hey, by the way, the leader has money. Let's borrow it from him. Yes, where is the leader? Where is the leader? Hey, where is the leader? Hey leader, please wait. I have something to discuss with you. When Li Yundong heard these words, he didn't dare to stay any longer. He immediately walked faster and faster, as if he was avoiding ghosts, and quickly escaped. He took a few turns and got rid of these guys. Then he held his head with both hands and screamed, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? These people are too stupid, aren't they?" At this time, Su Chan couldn't help laughing out loud. //7854627895541. Chapter 284. Go to watch net. Li Yundong glared at Su Chan. Laugh? How dare you laugh? Su Chan immediately covered her mouth, but her eyes were still smiling like crescent moons. From time to time, she would make a snorting sound. Watch net. 7K. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. I used to think that you were the most unreliable fox spirit in the world. I didn't expect that the fox spirits of the Fox Zen School were even more unreliable than you. Is this a fine tradition of the Fox Zen School? Su Chan wrapped her hands around his arm and said with a smile, "Who told you to be the leader of our Fox Zen School now? Besides, my master said that most of my Sherbois and the others have never left the Fox Zen School, so they are a little strange. Please forgive them." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "They are more than a little strange. It's simply bizarre." He sighed and shook his head. "Forget it. Do you know where the former sect leader's room is?" Su Chan smiled and said, "Of course I know." After that, she took Li Yundong's hand through a corridor, turned a corner, and pointed to an unlocked room. "This is it." Li Yundong pushed the door open and walked in. Although the furnishings in the room were simple, the decoration was full of classical charm. There were rockery and strange stones on the pot rack in the corner, which looked very elegant. Li Yundong walked through the front hall and into the study at the back. He saw a desk with ink, paper, and inkstone on it. Next to it was a bamboo bookshelf with some thread-bound books. He walked up to it and rummaged through it. Sure enough, he found a small purple-gold wooden box in the bookshelf. The box was about 8 inches long, 5 inches wide, and 5 inches high. There was a small copper lock hanging on the box. Li Yundong stretched out his fingers to pull it open, only to find that a row of runes suddenly lit up on the copper lock. "Don't pull it too hard," Su Chan said. "There's a rune array on it." Li Yundong put down the wooden box in his hand, looked around and said, "There should be a key there. Let's find it." Su Chan helped him search for a while and found a copper key the size of a pinky finger in a book on the bookshelf. She smiled happily and said, "I found it. Take a look and see if this works." Li Yundong took the key and said with a smile, "It's so complicated. It seems that there are treasures inside." Su Chan nodded curiously. "Yeah." Li Yundong opened the copper lock with a click, took a deep breath, and opened the small wooden box. He took a closer look and saw that there was an ID card at the top of the small wooden box. Below the ID card were several bankbooks, and below the bankbooks was a stack of white paper. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Your former leader is dead. What's the use of keeping the passbook? Unless there's a password on it, we can't withdraw the money." As he spoke, he took out his ID card and bankbook, put the ID card aside, and opened the last page of the bankbook. He took a closer look and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. The balance on the bankbook was 328 yuan. No way. Li Yundong's eyes widened. This is an empty passbook. He quickly opened the other 2 bankbooks and flipped to the last page with words. Without exception, there was a balance of 1 or 2 yuan. Li Yundong felt a chill run down his spine. No way. He didn't leave a single cent? What the hell? Suchan couldn't laugh anymore. She quickly said, "Look at what's written on the paper below." Li Yundong opened it and saw that it was a lease contract for the Taoist temple of the Fox Zen School. Li Yundong looked at the rental price and was immediately shocked. 35 million yuan for 5 years. Then he looked at the expiration date and was shocked again. It was next month. Good heavens, misfortune never comes alone, and blessings never come in pairs. Li Yundong took the contract and tilted his head to look at Suchan. "Why do I feel like I've boarded a pirate ship?" Suchan said angrily, "Don't say that about our Fox Zen school. It's not easy for Grandmaster to run this sect alone." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Well, now it's my turn to take over. Where can I get more than 5 million yuan? Suchan also said worriedly, "Yes, if it were 10 or 20,000 yuan, it would be fine. But what about more than 5 million yuan? She thought about it with a sad face. Suddenly, she jumped up and said, "Why don't we go to Sherbua and the others to discuss it?" Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle. "Forget it. I guess your former leader used a paternalistic management method. He didn't let them interfere in anything and took care of everything by himself. As a result, they seem to be very powerful, but in fact, they are just like you. They have never seen the world and don't understand the ways of the world. At first I thought Chowie was better, but now it seems that." Suchan jumped up and said coquettishly, "Don't say that." Li Yundong laughed and spread his hands. Okay, I won't say it. But how can we solve this problem? Our Fox Zen school will soon be sleeping on the street." Suchan rolled her eyes and said, "Then let them live in our house." Li Yundong immediately shook his head and glared at Suchan. "Are you crazy? Do you think it's 2 or 3 people? If more than a dozen people live here, how can they live? Who will sleep on the floor or me?" Suchan pouted and sat on the chair. "This won't work, that won't work. Then what should we do?" Li Yundong also pulled over a mahogany chair and sat down next to Suchan with a sigh. "Yes, what should we do? What you said before was right. If you haven't heard the Tao, it's difficult to learn the Dharma. If you've heard the Tao, it's difficult to get money. How am I supposed to get money in one day?" "I can't take such a group of vixens and live on the street, can I? Hey, do you think that when we quarreled with the boy who pursued you, I said that I would live on the street, and it immediately came true? Karma shouldn't have come so fast, right?" Suchan smiled and spat. "Bah, don't talk nonsense. You are my hero. How can you live on the street? You must have a way." Li Yundong sighed and frowned. He was thinking hard about a way. Suddenly he had an idea. He slapped his thigh and laughed. "I have a way." Suchan touched her thigh and said loudly, "If you have a way, why did you slap my thigh?" Li Yundong quickly rubbed it for her and said with a smile, "I was too excited. I accidentally hurt myself." Suchan pouted, but she was curious about what Li Yundong had thought of, so she asked, "What did you think of just now?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "When I went up the mountain from the Fox Zen school, I went through the back door of the Fox Zen school. I saw a lot of antiques, calligraphy and paintings in the secret room. Although, I broke some of them. I think there should be some intact ones in there that can be sold for money. Go to Kanban. 7K. OM. Go to Kanban. 7K. OM. Color. Paper. Learn net. Super_speed. More. If I sell any one of them, I will be a millionaire." Suchan was very simple. Seeing that Li Yundong had come up with this idea of robbing the east wall to pay the west wall, she didn't think there was anything wrong with it. The little girl only felt that it was good that her master could solve this problem. As for what she sold, it was the son selling the father's field. Anyway, it was not her savings, so she didn't feel bad about it. Suchan beamed and said, "Where is it? Where is it? Take me to see it. I've never been there before." Li Yundong thought of a solution and suddenly felt more confident. He laughed, waved his hand and said, "Well, I'll take you to see it." The two of them went out of the room, talking and laughing all the way, but there was no more gloom. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The ancients are right. It's hard to be a hero without a penny. No matter how good he is at fighting, and how powerful his shuntong is. So what? Without money, it's all in vain. Li Yundong and Su Chan came to the back door of the Taoist temple. Then, he held the little girl's hand, ran his qi and flew up. Su Chan was surprised and happy. She said, Yundong, you can fly now? I remember when you couldn't fly and needed my help. Li Yundong laughed and said, if I can't even fly, how can I drive away the enemies of the Fox Zen school? As he said this, he smiled at Su Chan and said, you used to take me flying. Now it's my turn to take you flying. Su Chan smiled sweetly and looked at Li Yundong. The two of them felt as if they had drunk honey, and a strong sweetness seeped into their hearts. The two of them flew along the hillside to the hidden entrance of the cave. As soon as Li Yundong pushed aside the grass and leaves covering the entrance of the cave, he saw a group of black shadows flying out. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately pulled Su Chan far away. When the two of them flew away, he found that a flock of birds had flown out of the cave, and then a group of monkeys ran out with a squeak. Li Yundong laughed and said, it turns out that there is a group of guests inside. I thought there were enemies. Su Chan's eyes were sharp. She found that the monkeys seemed to be holding something in their hands. She said, these monkeys seem to be holding something. Li Yundong didn't pay attention to it and said with a smile, maybe it's fruit? The two of them flew back to the entrance of the cave and walked along the corridor. After walking for a while, Li Yundong came to the big stone room where he had practiced the heavenly Jindan technique. Su Chan saw Lin Youfa, who had been dead for a long time, at a glance. She cried out and couldn't help sighing. Alas, he was the leader of a sect. I didn't expect that he would die without a burial place. Yundong, find a place to bury him, okay? Li Yundong sighed and said, you're kind. He hurt you, but you're speaking up for him. Su Chan took Li Yundong's arm and said, death is the most important thing. Let's let bygones be bygones. Look, aren't we all right now? Li Yundong nodded and said, well, you're right. We'll find a place to bury him later, so that he can rest in peace. After that, he took Su Chan's hand, pointed to the words on the wall, and said with a smile, look at what's on it. Before, Li Yundong had never told Su Chan that he had seen the heavenly Jindan technique carved by the mystical silver fox here. The purpose was to give the little girl a surprise. Sure enough, from the beginning, Su Chan's whole body shook and her eyes widened. When she saw the last part, she was so shocked that her face turned red, her sinuses closed, and she gasped for breath. She screamed, grabbed Li Yundong's hand tightly with both hands and kept shouting, Yundong, Yundong. This was left by the mystical silver fox. Oh my God. It turns out that this is the reason why our Fox Zen school hasn't moved away for thousands of years. Su Chan's eyes were shining as she looked at every word on the wall. Her face was full of excitement and yearning. After looking back and forth several times, her emotions slowly calmed down. She said with longing, if only I could be like the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong gently stroked her hair and said softly, that day will come. Su Chan nodded hard and said, well, you've become so strong. I want to become stronger too. Li Yundong pointed at the tip of the little girl's nose with his finger and said with a smile, okay, I'll urge you. Su Chan giggled and said, I want you to teach me cultivation in the future. I used to teach you, and you'll teach me in the future. Li Yundong chuckled and said, okay, but you can't be lazy. The two of them talked and laughed as they walked inside. Along the way, mice ran out from time to time in the tunnel. Li Yundong felt a little strange. It's strange. There were no mice in there last time. Su Chan said, it must be because you didn't close the door of the stone cave. So monkeys, birds, and mice all ran in. Li Yundong said with a smile, that must be it. But before he could finish his words, his face suddenly changed dramatically. He pulled Su Chan and ran inside crazily. Su Chan shouted in confusion, what's wrong? What happened? Li Yundong didn't say anything. When he pulled Su Chan down to the next floor of the stone cave, he suddenly stayed at the door of the stone room, as if he had been hit by the body-fixing spell. The stone room was full of mice, and these mice were frantically gnawing at everything that had fallen to the ground. Li Yundong took a deep breath and covered Su Chan's ears. Then, with a fierce roar, he killed all the mice in the stone room in an instant. Li Yundong watched as the mice fell to the side without making a sound. The corner of his eyes twitched, and he said to Su Chan, "Hurry up and see if there's anything intact." Su Chan was also dumbfounded at this time. She quickly squatted down and rummaged through the mouse corpses all over the ground. The two of them searched back and forth in the stone room several times. When they stood up and looked at each other, Li Yundong stared at Su Chan with his eyes wide open. Su Chan also stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. The two of them shook their heads at the same time. Li Yundong suddenly let out a long sigh and wailed, "Oh my God, I've really become a loser. There's not even a single intact antique calligraphy or painting. Isn't this too tragic? // 785462789541. Chapter 285. Go to watch net. Looking at the mess in the stone room, Li Yundong felt like he was going crazy. Su Chan couldn't help but sigh and say, "What should we do?" Li Yundong let out a long sigh and said, "It's all my fault for not closing the door. What a tragedy." As he spoke, he casually picked up a painting. It was Wu Daozi's Heavenly King sending his child painting that he had seen before. The head of the character on the painting had been bitten by a mouse, and there was a hole in it. It was truly a tragic sight. Watch net. Kai 98 when 1/0 net 6 he smiled bitterly and said, "The historians and collectors of China will kill me." Wu Daozi's famous painting was destroyed just like that. Su Chan said cautiously, "Maybe it's fake?" Li Yundong turned his head and smiled bitterly at her. "You really know how to comfort people." "Alas, don't say it. This place was probably the meticulous collection of the previous leaders of the Fox Zen School. But now, less than 2 days after I became the leader of the Fox Zen School, these treasures have been completely destroyed by me. I think I can be honored as the most prodigal leader in the history of Fox Zen School." Su Chan had left the Fox Zen School when she was a child. Although her sense of belonging to the sect was strong, it was not as strong as her feelings for Li Yundong. She smiled awkwardly for a while and said, "Why don't we leave here first?" Li Yundong also looked at the broken antiques and paintings on the ground, which were very eye-catching and annoying. He shook his head and said, "Let's go. I'll think of another way. There's really no such thing as getting rich overnight in this world." He walked to the door of the stone room, looked back and said, "Alas, if the other people of the Fox Zen School find out, I'll have to step down immediately, won't I?" Su Chan immediately said loudly, "No, you saved our Fox Zen School. Sherbua and the others won't do that." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "You silly girl, what kind of society are we in now? Come on. In this economic society, you have to be rich to be the boss. No matter how good you are at fighting, if you can't even feed your underlings, who would want to work for you? It's already very difficult for me to raise a little girl like you, let alone such a large group of people." With that, Li Yundong pinched the little girl's nose with a smile. Su Chan screamed and jumped away. Her eyes were rolling in her eye sockets, as if she was thinking about something. Li Yundong smiled and turned to walk out of the cave, saying, "What are you thinking about? Let's go." Su Chan suddenly had an idea. She pinched her fingers and ignited a ball of fire in her palm. She threw it into the stone room with a bang. The stone room was originally made of wooden shelves and paper paintings. As soon as it came into contact with the fire, it immediately burst into flames. Hearing the sound, Li Yundong turned around in surprise, only to see the little girl standing at the door of the stone room, clapping her hands proudly and laughing, as if she had done something amazing. Watch net. Li Yundong stared blankly at the raging fire in the stone room and stammered, "What are you doing?" Su Chan turned around with a proud look on her face. "They won't know if I burn them all. This is called destroying the evidence." Li Yundong sucked in a breath of cold air. "Are you even crazier than me? Don't you know that some calligraphy and paintings can be repaired? And some parts of antiques can also be repaired? There's no way to save them at all." Su Chan's smile froze on her face. She quickly lowered her head, looked up at Li Yundong timidly, and then quickly lowered her eyes again. She twisted the corner of her clothes with her fingers and said weakly, "Did I do something wrong again?" The expression on Li Yundong's face was very interesting. He didn't know whether he should cry or laugh. After a long time, he swallowed hard and said in a hoarse voice, "Just now, the most tragic catastrophe in the history of the Chinese antique industry happened. And I am the main culprit, and you are the accomplice. No, I just didn't close the door, but you set it on fire. You are the main culprit, and I am the accomplice." The more Li Yundong spoke, the more righteous he became. The more Su Chan listened, the lower her head was. Tears were about to fall, and she muttered in a weak voice, "I also want to help you." Seeing the girl like this, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He held the girl in his arms, pinched the flesh next to her cheek, and said with a smile, Okay. I am the main culprit and you are the accomplice, okay?" Su Chan smiled through her tears and raised her head. "Sir, you are the best to me." Li Yundong put on a serious face and said deliberately, "Don't think that you can escape the punishment of law and morality just because you are an accomplice. If you behave like this today, you will definitely be nailed to the pillar of shame in the history of Chinese antiques." Li Yundong's harsh words made the girl stare blankly. After a long time, she asked weakly, "I will be nailed to the pillar of shame because I am an accomplice. What will you do if you are the main culprit?" Li Yundong said seriously, "I will be nailed to the pillar of shame." Su Chan laughed out loud, hugged Li Yundong, and said in a sweet voice, "No matter where I am, as long as I am with Yundong." Li Yundong laughed and shook his head helplessly. "I really lost to you. In the future, please be more careful when you do things." Su Chan pouted and said, "Didn't you cause this situation because you didn't close the door?" Li Yundong glared at her and said guiltily, "Don't say that. If others find out what we did tonight, they will be arrested and sentenced to 700 or 800 years in prison." Su Chan rolled her eyes and giggled. "It doesn't matter. There is no evidence now." Li Yundong coughed and asked seriously, "Where were you tonight?" Su Chan smiled and said, "With my master." Li Yundong asked seriously again, "Then where is your master?" Su Chan said cleverly, "I was looking for something in the leader's study." Li Yundong nodded with satisfaction. Well, you are worth teaching. Let's go. Remember, tonight, we didn't see anything, we didn't hear anything, so we don't know anything." Su Chan hurriedly nodded her head like a chicken pecking at grains. After the two heinous criminals burned the evidence, they repeatedly compared their confessions, then looked at each other with a tacit understanding. They chuckled and walked along the tunnel out of the cave. Go to see Net. Kai 98 when 1 Shui 0 Net 6. As soon as he walked out of the cave, Li Yundong found that the sky was already a little bright. He flew down the mountain with Su Chan and returned to the Taoist temple. The two of them walked to the leader's study like thieves. As soon as they arrived at the door, they saw Chowie coming up to them. At this time, Chowie had already taken off her costume and was wearing a Taoist robe. When she saw Li Yundong, she went up to him. The first thing she said scared Li Yundong a lot. "Leader, you are here? We looked for you all night last night, but we don't know where you went. We were so worried." When Li Yundong heard this, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He thought to himself, "No way. We just compared our confessions, and now we don't need to use them? Did we work for nothing?" Li Yundong forced himself to calm down. He asked with a glimmer of hope, "Have you been waiting here for a long time?" Chowie smiled and said, "Not long." Li Yundong breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good." Chowie immediately smiled and said, "About half a night." "Half a night? Is this not long?" Li Yundong's forehead was full of sweat. He wanted to laugh, but the corners of his mouth twitched and he couldn't. Seeing Li Yundong's strange expression, Chowie asked, "Leader, where did you go last night?" Li Yundong forced a smile. His mind was racing, but he couldn't find a good excuse to dodge the question. Fortunately, Su Chan reacted quickly. She said shyly, "Six Sherboy, don't ask." At first, Chowie looked at Su Chan with some confusion, and then looked at Li Yundong. She suddenly understood. "Hey, What can two devoted lovers do in private for one night? Chowie smiled ambiguously and said, Oh, I see. Li Yundong also laughed dryly with her for a while. The corners of his mouth moved, but he didn't smile. The three of them laughed at each other for a while. Li Yundong quickly changed the topic and said, What do you want from me? Chowie sighed and said, Thousands of words, but in the end, it all comes down to one word. Money. When the people we invited saw that we weren't going to sing, they shouted that they wanted to leave. Before the performance was finished, they wanted to charge us for the whole performance and the rental of various materials. Li Yundong couldn't help asking, Didn't I give you money? Are you using it to play mahjong? Chowie smiled bitterly and said, Leader, it's just entertainment. Do you really want to spend the money on your own? Besides, we inner disciples don't go down the mountain all day long. What's the use of money? It's nothing more than a flower. However, the money you gave us is not enough. Li Yundong asked, How much do you need? After saying this, his heart was beating like a drum. If it was an astronomical number, then he, the leader of the Fox Zen School, who had just ascended to the position of leader of the Fox Zen School, would be disgraced. While he was feeling uneasy, Chowie gestured a number and said, 38 yuan. Li Yundong almost fainted. He cried out involuntarily, Don't you have 38 yuan? Chowie shook her head like a rattle. No, the leader of the Fox Zen School is responsible for our food, clothing, and accommodation. We don't need to take a penny. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, These guys are really stingy. They want 38 yuan. Chowie also smiled bitterly and said, They also said that your Taoist temple occupies such a large mountain, but you are not willing to give them 38 yuan. Who would believe that you can't afford it? How stingy! Li Yundong was completely speechless. He pressed his forehead with one hand and thought to himself, What a tragedy! I'm probably the poorest leader in all of history, right? Li Yundong touched his pocket and found that he was also penniless. He only had a credit card that he always carried with him. He sighed and said, Where is there an ATM nearby? I'll go and get some money. Chowie said, There is a hotel near the foot of the mountain. Do you need me to go with you, leader? When Li Yundong heard the word leader at this time, he felt that it was very harsh. He waved his hand and said, No, I know where it is. Su Chan can accompany me. As he said this, he quickly pulled Su Chan out of the Taoist temple. Chowie looked at their backs from behind and muttered to herself, One of them still looks like a virgin, while the other is still full of vitality. They don't look like they had sex last night. By the way, do they like other things? While Chowie was thinking about it, Li Yundong had already left the Taoist temple with Su Chan. After they went down the mountain, they withdrew money from the UnionPay ATM, set up in the hotel at the foot of the mountain, and then returned to the Taoist temple to pay. When the money was paid, the cashier looked at Li Yundong and said disdainfully, Seeing that you have such a big business at such a young age, I thought you were very powerful. I didn't expect that you would even be stingy with 38 yuan for a small business like ours. You are really stingy. Humph. After that he walked away. Li Yundong's face darkened, but Su Chan looked at him and whispered, Yundong, don't pay attention to this kind of person. You will definitely be very rich in the future. You didn't know anything about cultivation before, but now you are already a famous cultivator in the cultivation world. I believe that even if you want to make money, you will have a very good way. Li Yundong felt much better. He thought for a moment and said, I do have a way to make money, but I lack the starting capital, and I can't do it alone. I have to go back and discuss it with Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, and ask them for help. Moreover, the lease of the Taoist temple of the Fox Zen School is about to expire. I have to get the money as soon as possible. As he said this, he took Su Chan to Chao Yi and told her his plan, the place where he would go to school in Tian'an City, and his address. He also told her his phone number, and finally left 10,000 yuan. The former leader didn't leave any money. Our Fox Zen School can't go on like this, or we will starve to death. Take this money and use it first. I'll find a way to get some money. During the days I'm away, Take care of the Fox Zen School for me. If anything happens, call me. If you encounter an enemy, fight if you can and run if you can't. It doesn't matter if we lose the Taoist temple of the Fox Zen School. What matters is the people. Even if we lose it, we can take it back. Chowie opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she saw Li Yundong leave in a hurry with Su Chan. In the end, she didn't say anything. //7854627895541. Chapter 286. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong led Su Chan back to Tiannan City. As soon as they entered the house, Su Chan let out a cheer and looked around happily. She touched here and there, greedily inhaling the air in the house. It's so good to be home again. It's so comfortable at home. Li Yundong chuckled and looked around. He didn't find Ziyuan and Wan Hongling at home. He thought to himself, could it be that these two girls are in my own house? After wandering around the living room for a while, she seemed to think of something. Then, she went into Li Yundong's room. After a while, she came out with her hands behind her back and said mysteriously, guess what I have in my hand? Li Yundong smiled and said, what else can it be? Of course it's your Hello Kitty piggy bank. Su Chan pouted and took out the piggy bank behind her. I really can't hide anything from you. It's so boring. But she soon smiled again and said, I'll smash it and take out the money in it for you to use, okay? Li Yundong gently stroked the little girl's hair and said with a smile, this is your private money. Keep it. I still have money to use, so I don't need it. Su Chan nodded, looked at the piggy bank in her hand eagerly, and said, then I'll save more money for you. Li Yundong laughed and held the little girl in his arms lovingly. Didn't I give you that money? Silly girl. Su Chan giggled. She put her arms around Li Yundong's waist and pressed her face against his chest. She sniffed his breath and said, Yundong, I'm so happy. Li Yundong smiled, stroked her hair, and said, we will get better and better in the future, right? Su Chan raised her head, her face full of happiness and joy. Yes, but not long after, she suddenly thought of something and said with a sad face, Yundong, I miss my master. I wonder how she is. Li Yundong's face froze and he said in a deep voice, as a senior of the Zhengyi school's Linggong sect, Yin Fang has been lurking in the Fox Zen school for 9 years without being discovered. It can be seen how good her endurance is. I used to think that she would return to the Linggong sect as soon as possible, but now that I think about it, I don't think it's possible. Based on her behavior and character, she would rather betray the world than let the world betray her. Such a person is the most cunning and suspicious. She won't trust anyone, so I guess she must have a way out. And it's very likely that she hasn't returned to the Linggong sect. Speaking of this, Li Yundong also sighed and said, if Yin Fang hides herself, it will be difficult. I don't know where to find her. Su Chan said with a worried face, but what if she wants to go back to Linggong sect? Li Yundong thought for a moment, then let go of Su Chan and said, I'll go look for Ziyuan. As he spoke, he walked to the balcony and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention, he quickly jumped to the balcony where Ziyuan and Wan Hongling lived. He probed around and saw that there was no one in the room, so he jumped back and shook his head at Su Chan. No one's here. Su Chan looked disappointed, but she also knew that this matter could not be rushed. Instead, she comforted Li Yundong and said, it's okay. Take your time. Seeing that the little girl was so sensible, Li Yundong also comforted her. Given the grudge between Yin Fang and Ao Wushuang, I don't think Yin Fang will let Ao Wushuang die so easily. Moreover, your master has only been sealed. Yin Fang is now a young spirit body. She must find another body to possess as soon as possible. Otherwise, when the yang spirit becomes the yin spirit will run out of spiritual qi, and she will not be able to find a body to possess. Then her soul will really be destroyed and she will disappear. Su Chan nodded and hugged Li Yundong tightly. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were full of worry. Li Yundong patted her back lovingly, but he couldn't help thinking, where are Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling at this time? Could it be that they have returned to the Linggong sect? Just as Li Yundong was thinking about this, in the Linggong sect of Mount Longhu, Wan Hongling, who had just woken up from her meditation, opened her eyes. Wan Hongling had followed Zi Yuan to the Fox Zen school and witnessed an unprecedentedly fierce battle. Although most of the cultivators were experts of the younger generation, their level of fighting was extremely high, which had benefited her a lot. She followed Zi Yuan back to the sect and began to meditate. When she opened her eyes again, it was already the next day. When she woke up in her room, the first thing she did was to go to the cave residence of the Linggong sect to see if Zi Yuan, who was in seclusion, had come out. She went to see the net. 7K. OM. Zi Yuan had been beaten by Li Yundong so hard that the corners of her mouth were bleeding, and her internal organs had been injured. Therefore, when she returned to the mansion, she immediately chose to go into seclusion. Wan Hongling walked around the cave and saw that the entrance of a cave covered by a huge rock was tightly closed. She sighed faintly and thought to herself, Sister Zi Yuan, you have really sacrificed too much for this Jindan successor. The 3 great treasures of our Linggong sect have been destroyed, and you have been injured by him. But is it worth it for you to pay so much? Wan Hongling's gaze fell on the spirit water pond. She saw that the 2 flower buds of the twin breeders, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, were slowly growing. The 2 flowers were about to bloom, emitting a faint fluorescent light. She could vaguely see 2 tiny human figures shrinking into a ball. Wan Hongling couldn't help smiling. Just as she was about to reach out and touch them, she heard a sudden sound of something breaking through the air outside. A woman shouted, Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling of the Linggong sect, come out quickly. Wan Hongling frowned and immediately walked out quickly. As soon as she walked out, she saw Zhou Ping, who had had a conflict with her before, standing in front of the mansion with a sneer. Next to her was a Taoist nun in a Taoist robe. This Taoist nun was plain-looking and had nothing in her hands. There was neither a horsetail whisk nor a sword in her hand like the others. She was just holding her sleeves, her eyelids drooping, as if she was looking down at the tip of her nose obediently. Nothing around her could attract her attention. Wan Hongling took a closer look at her and saw a round red dot the size of a pencil between her eyebrows, which looked like a red mole. Wan Hongling suddenly felt a chill in her heart. This was the Lingsha mole that only the direct bloodline of the head of the Jingyi school had the qualification point. Sure enough, when Zhou Ping saw Wan Hongling coming out, she shouted, How dare you? You've seen the lady of the earthly fire of the Jingyi school, and you still haven't bowed down. Wan Hongling was shocked. The lady of the earthly fire? Could it be the lady of the earthly fire, who was both the elder sister of the leader of the Jingyi school and the eldest sister of the leader of the Jingyi school? Wan Hongling was looking at Zhang Ling and feeling incredulous in her heart. As a disciple of the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school, she had naturally heard of the deeds of the seniors. In the past, Zi Yuan had commented on the famous cultivators in the world, and the lady of the earthly fire was among them. She remembered that Zi Yuan had once said, The lady of the earthly fire's control of fire can be said to be unparalleled in the world. She can draw out the samadhi true fire from the 9th earth and burn everything in the world. She had originally thought that a cultivator who could cultivate fire to such a level would be arrogant and surly, or at least a person like fierce Zhang Fei. But today, it turned out to be an ordinary Taoist nun, who didn't seem to be much older than her. Zhou Ping saw that Wan Hongling was just staring at Zhang Ling without speaking or bowing. She suddenly became furious and said, How rude! Are all the people of the Linggong sect so rude? Wan Hongling withdrew her gaze and glanced at her, but she still didn't salute. Instead, she said, My sister Zi Yuan is now like the leader of the Linggong sect. Even when she sees the leader of the Jingyi school, she has to salute him. I am also her shimi. In terms of status, I am equal to the lady of the earthly fire. Why should I salute her? Zhou Ping was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. B****. Even if the leader sees the Lady of the Earthly Fire, he has to respectfully call her Shiji. Who do you think you are? How dare you be so rude? Wan Hongling was born with a fiery temper. Except for Li Yundong, she had never been afraid of anyone else. She sneered and said, "When the leader of the Earthly Fire sees the Lady of the Earthly Fire, he calls her Shiji. This is an internal relationship. But when my Shiji, the Lady of the Earthly Fire, sees him, she has to salute him. This is an external relationship. Haven't you heard of the saying that there is a difference between the inside and the outside?" Zhou Ping was furious. "How dare you be so presumptuous? Do you still have our Jingyi school in your eyes? A small branch of the Jingyi school dares to be so arrogant. Fortunately, you have been in decline all these years. Otherwise, if you were allowed to be arrogant, wouldn't you be riding on the neck of the Jingyi school and peeing on it?" Wan Hongling also said angrily, "You also know that our Linggong sect is a branch of the Jingyi school? Logically speaking, our Linggong sect is also a child of the Jingyi school. It's fine if you don't raise us, but over the years, you have seized the opportunity to suppress us. When have you ever regarded us as a branch? As the saying goes, if you treat me as a scholar of the country, I will repay you as a scholar of the country. If you treat me as a bandit, I will repay you as a bandit. You have done the first thing, but now you are blaming me for doing the second thing. Don't you think it's ridiculous? What's more, I haven't done the second thing. I'm just acting according to the law." Zhou Ping was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She pointed at Wan Hongling and was speechless. You. She was Zhang Tianhe's Shiji, and had been secretly in love with Zhang Tianhe for a long time. This time, she had accompanied him down the mountain. She had thought that it would be a good job, but she hadn't expected that Zhang Tianhe would go to the Linggong sect to visit her, because he admired Ziyuan's beauty and reputation. This had already made her very unhappy. But what she hadn't expected was that Zhang Tianhe would lose to Li Jiandong in the subsequent battle, and that Li Jiandong had an affair with that little b*tch. After Zhou Ping returned to Mount Longhu, the more she thought about it, the more unwilling she became. However, the leader of the Jingyi school was in seclusion, so she didn't dare to disturb him. She told Zhang Ling the whole thing with some embellishments. As Zhang Tianhe's aunt, Zhang Ling had doted on him since he was a child. When she heard this, she was immediately furious. What? The little b*tch of the Linggong sect colluded with outsiders to bully the future leader of our Jingyi school. How could this be? How could this be? After hearing this, Zhang Ling immediately brought Zhou Ping to denounce her. But she was also worried that she had made a mistake, so she let Zhou Ping speak up while she observed silently from the side. At this point, Zhang Ling had no choice but to speak. She raised her eyelids and her eyes shone brightly. She snorted coldly and said, "Little girl, you're young, but you talk big. Do you think that our Jingyi school is a criminal enemy?" Wan Hongling snorted coldly. "I wouldn't dare. If the Jingyi school regards us as national warriors, we will naturally repay them as national warriors. If they regard us as a criminal enemy, humph." Zhang Ling suddenly burst into laughter, which made Wan Hongling's heart beat violently. Her eardrums felt as if they were being burned by a raging fire, and she felt a burst of heat and pain. Zhang Ling sneered and said, "What a big tone. I think your Linggong sect really has no successors and has no good discipline. Today, I will discipline you on behalf of your leader." Wan Hongling's heart trembled. Just as she was about to step back, she suddenly heard a soft voice say, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire has come. May I know what's the matter?" As soon as this voice sounded, the tense atmosphere on the field suddenly calmed down a lot. If Zhang Ling's voice was like a raging fire, extremely fierce, aggressive, and making people panic, then this voice was like a clear spring, gentle and calm, making people feel relaxed and happy. For a moment, everyone turned their heads to look at the source of the voice, only to see a beautiful woman in a purple robe walking out of the cave of the Linggong sect. Every step she took gave people the feeling that she was treading on the waves. She was ethereal, like a fairy from the ninth heaven, who had descended to the mortal world. This woman was none other than Zi Yuan, the eldest Shiji of the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school. Chapter 287. Go to Watch Network. Zhang Ling saw that Zi Yuan had an imposing manner as soon as she appeared. Although she was not as aggressive as herself, she was very difficult to deal with. She secretly nodded in her heart. It's said that Zi Yuan is the #1 master in the cultivation world of the younger generation. Now it seems that she deserves her reputation. It can be said that she is worthy of her reputation. Although Wang Yuanshan was a bastard who couldn't distinguish between good and evil, and was in cahoots with demons, the disciple he had taught was very outstanding. Although she was secretly admiring Zi Yuan in her heart, she was not polite with her words. She deliberately pretended not to know Zi Yuan and asked, "Excuse me, this is?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and bowed. "I'm Zi Yuan from the Linggong sect. Greetings, Jimren of the earthly fire." When Zhang Ling saw Zi Yuan salute her in the manner of a junior greeting an elder, she also withdrew her aggressive momentum. She nodded and said politely, "It turns out to be Jimren Zi Yuan. It's really better to meet you in person than to hear about you." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "May I know why Jimren of the earthly fire has come?" Zhang Ling snorted and said, "I heard that a cultivator named Li Yundong disturbed the siege of the Fox Zen school by the 6 great sects and injured my nephew, Zhang Tianhe. I wonder if that's true." Zi Yuan lowered her eyes and said, "Yes." Zhang Ling snorted again and said, "Then let me ask you, do you know this Li Yundong?" Zi Yuan's expression did not change as she said, "Yes." Zhang Ling snorted heavily, and anger appeared in her eyes. "Well, you are really colluding with each other. Zi Yuan, I just called you Jimren. I hope you can turn back as soon as possible. Don't mix with these demons and ghosts. And don't associate with this kind of self-deprecating cultivator. Otherwise," Zi Yuan asked lightly. "Otherwise what?" Zhang Ling pointed to the peak of Mount Longhu and said angrily, "Otherwise, your master will be your role model." Zi Yuan's face was calm, but Wan Hongling couldn't help but say angrily, "What right do you have to teach Sister Zi Yuan like this? In terms of status, she is not inferior to you. In terms of cultivation methods, she may not be inferior to you." Zhang Ling threw her head back and laughed out loud. Her laughter reverberated through the mountains and caused hundreds of birds to fly out of the forest. "When I first heard about this, I didn't believe it. But now that I see your attitude, it's obvious that you have a guilty conscience. How ridiculous! As the future leader of the Linggong sect of Jingyi school, how could he degenerate himself to hang out with such a lowly person? What a disgrace to the name of our Jingyi school. Let me give you a piece of advice. Jimren Zi Yuan, the sea of sin is boundless. Repent and you will be saved." Although Zhang Ling's words were vicious and harsh, Zi Yuan just smiled slightly and remained calm. She bowed her head and said, "Thank you for your teachings, Lady of the Earthly Fire. Everyone has their own way of cultivation. I know very well what I'm doing. You don't need to give me any advice." Zhang Ling's expression changed, and she said sternly, "Zi Yuan, don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. You have to understand that the succession ceremony of the head of the Linggong sect in half a year can only be carried out with the approval of our Jingyi school. Don't play with fire and bring about your own destruction. Once our Jingyi school disagrees, don't let the sect handed down by Jimren Tongtian of the Linggong sect die in your hands." After that, she flicked her sleeves and said coldly, "You're on your own. Let's go." Zhang Ling snorted heavily and turned into a beam of cyan light. Zhou Ping also looked at the two of them with a sneer, snorted, and turned into a beam of cyan light to chase after them. Go to the internet. Seeing that the two of them had left, Wan Hongling spat fiercely on the ground and scolded, "You be **starred. Bah." But after scolding them, she turned to Zi Yuan with a worried face and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, although Samba is fierce, what she said is right. If the succession ceremony of the head of our Linggong sect can't be held as scheduled in half a year, the position of the head of our sect will either fall to someone else and be appointed by the people of the Jingyi school, or our Linggong sect will perish. As she said this, Yuan Hongling anxiously tugged at Ziyuan's sleeve and said, Sister Ziyuan, do you want to watch our Linggong sect fall into the hands of others, or watch the Linggong sect perish? Ziyuan's expression was solemn. She was silent for a long time before she said, Cultivation is difficult, and it's more difficult than going to heaven. This is the path of cultivation that I have chosen. If there are thousands of disasters, I will do my best to deal with them. Yuan Hongling said anxiously, But what about the sect? The Jingyi school is now determined to defeat us, and we are weak. What should we do? Ziyuan sighed slightly, stroked Yuan Hongling's hair, and said, Hongling, there is no such thing as a never-ending banquet in the world, and there is no such thing as an indestructible sect. Even if it was the universe, there would be a day when it would be destroyed. If our Linggong sect is really going to perish, nothing you do will be of any use. Yuan Hongling was stunned. She said again, Then we might as well announce to the public that our Linggong sect is an independent sect. Ziyuan shook her head and said, No, the Jingyi school will definitely attack us. We have lost 2 of the 3 magic treasures. At this time, we are no match for the Jingyi school. Yuan Hongling stomped her feet and said anxiously, This won't do, that won't do, I'm so angry. You might be able to endure this, but I can't. As she spoke, she seemed to think of something. Her eyes lit up and she said loudly, By the way, let's go find Li Yundong. Now that his cultivation is so powerful, he will be able to help us. This guy has a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Maybe he has a plan. Ziyuan smiled. Didn't you hear what the Lady of the Earthly Fire said just now? If we go to find Li Yundong, it will confirm her words. Yuan Hongling said angrily, She said that we colluded with Li Yundong, so let's show her. It was better than waiting for death. Look at the way she's talking. Even if you didn't do it, she can still blame it on you. Besides, I don't believe that you won't look for him after you come out of seclusion. Ziyuan sighed. You're right. I'm going to look for him after I come out of seclusion. Watch net. Yuan Hongling smiled and said, See, I was right. This guy has received so many benefits from us. It's time for him to repay us. However, Ziyuan glared at Yuan Hongling sternly. Be asterisk starred. Are you a businessman or a cultivator? How can you say such things? I'm warning you, if you say a word about this in front of him, I will immediately disown you as my shimmy. These words were extremely harsh, and Yuan Hongling was frightened. She took a step back, widened her eyes, and looked at Ziyuan in disbelief. Sister Ziyuan, I won't say anything. You don't have to scare me like this, do you? You were so scary just now. Ziyuan's expression softened a lot. She said, Just remember it. Don't mention this to him in the future. Otherwise, you will drag him into the conflict of our Jingyi school. This will harm him. Yuan Hongling walked up to Ziyuan and took her hand. She couldn't help but say with tears in her eyes, Sister Ziyuan, you always think of others like this, but who has ever thought of you? Ziyuan sighed and stroked Yuan Hongling's hair. I still have you to think of me, don't you? Let's go back to Mount Tianlong first and see if Li Yundong is there. If not, we'll go back to Tiannan City. After that, she turned into 2 beams of green light and quickly left with Yuan Hongling. Just as Ziyuan and Yuan Hongling left Mount Longhu, Li Yundong was at home, preparing to go shopping with Su Chan. But before they could go out, Li Yundong heard the buzzing sound of his cell phone. He looked around and found it vibrating in the corner of the sofa. He picked it up and saw that it was a call from Zhou Qin. When he looked again, he saw that there were more than 100 missed calls. Li Yundong quickly answered and said, Hello. As soon as he spoke, the other end of the line immediately fell silent. Zhou Qin seemed to take a deep breath and suppress her emotions. She said in a slightly trembling voice, You're back? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Yes, are you still worried that I won't come back? Zhou Qin didn't speak. The silence on the phone was a little depressing. Li Yundong said with a smile. I went out to do something before. Why did you call me? Zhou Qin was silent for a while before she said slowly. It's nothing. I just wanted to hear what you had to say. What have you been busy with these days? As soon as she asked, she immediately changed her words and said, Forget it, I shouldn't have asked. Li Yundong remembered that Zhou Qin was now his disciple. Although he hadn't officially accepted her as a disciple, their relationship was not the same as before. There were some things that he didn't need to hide from her. It's okay. I'll tell you slowly when we meet. Zhou Qin seemed to think of something. She said, By the way, Feng Na has been looking for you everywhere these days. She has come to class many times. I asked her what she wanted, but she didn't say anything. Do you want to call her? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, Forget it, I'll go to school. I've been absent for so many days. If I don't go, there will be a missing person notice. Zhou Qin's voice sounded a little cheerful at this time. She said, Well, if you don't come, your classmates will forget you. Li Yundong chuckled and said, See you later. After that, he hung up the phone and was in a daze. Su Chan asked in a low voice, Yundong, what's wrong? Li Yundong seemed to wake up from a dream. He said, Nothing, I just feel a little emotional. Su Chan asked, What are you emotional about? Li Yundong laughed and said, It's nothing. I just came back from the Fox Zen school, and immediately went to school. It's as if I've come from one world to another. Your Fox Zen school is really unlucky to have a college student like me as its leader. No wonder the problem of food and clothing can't be solved. Su Chan pretended to be angry and said, Don't say that. Moreover, this is not your Fox Zen school, but our Fox Zen school. You are now a member of the Fox Zen school. You have to carry forward our Fox Zen school. Reinvigorate our Fox Zen school. Li Yundong laughed and said, I don't dare to say that. If you don't starve to death, I'll burn incense and pray to Buddha. Su Chan smiled and reached out to touch Li Yundong's cheek. Shame on you, leader. What a good-for-nothing. Li Yundong grabbed her hand, stared at her, and pretended to be angry. Do you think it's easy for me to feed a large group of people like you? How dare you say that I'm useless? Watch me. The two of them laughed for a while, and then went out. Because Su Chan was by his side, Li Yundong was reluctant to let her walk with him. The two of them still took a taxi to school. As soon as they arrived at the school gate, they saw Zhou Qin standing there, as if waiting for them. This girl was like a wintersweet standing at the school gate. She was slim and graceful, and her temperament was so cold that no one dared to approach her. Ordinary boys would feel ashamed of themselves if they looked at her for too long. Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin from afar, and waved at her with a smile. When Zhou Qin saw Li Yundong, her face immediately lit up with joy. However, when she saw Su Chan beside Li Yundong, she quickly hid it carefully. She walked up to Li Yundong and said respectfully, Master. Su Chan was stunned for a moment. She pulled Li Yundong's hand and asked, Have you accepted a disciple? Before Li Yundong could speak, Zhou Qin said to Su Chan respectfully, Ma'am. Su Chan suddenly blushed. She was shy and happy, and her vigilance towards Zhou Qin immediately dropped a lot. She giggled and said, Don't call me that. I don't have a gift for you. Zhou Qin smiled slightly. Why do you say that? Su Chan giggled and said, In our sect, if you call me that, you will get a gift. As she said this, she enthusiastically took Zhou Qin's arm and said, By the way, do you know that Li Yundong is now the leader of our sect? Zhou Qin and Su Chan had a good relationship. At this time, she was deliberately flattering him, so her face was also full of smiles. She looked at Li Yundong in surprise and asked, What leader? Su Chan proudly showed off and said, That's a long story. Li Yundong saw the two girls whispering intimately to each other, but he felt strange in his heart, especially Zhou Qin. This girl seemed to be wearing a thick mask on her face. Li Yundong shook his head and walked into the school. When he was about to reach the bottom of the teaching building, he heard Feng Na shouting in surprise, Li Yundong, stop. Li Yundong turned his head with a smile, and saw Feng Na quickly running up to him, and throwing a punch at him. With Li Yundong's current cultivation, even 100 Feng Na couldn't hit him. But he still stood still and didn't use his chi. He let her punch fall on his shoulder and said with a smile, "Are you looking for me?" Feng Na laughed and scolded, "I've been looking for you for a few days. My phone has been ringing off the hook these days. What's wrong with you? Why do you always use your phone as a landline?" Li Yundong smiled and said, Sorry. There's something urgent I have to do." "What's so urgent?" Feng Na winked and said, Good news. The deputy mayor will be here tomorrow. And it's the day of the new students' final training. He will be here to inspect the work. At that time, the school will have a representative of the new students and a representative of the school to speak. The school has decided to give you the position of the school representative. Li Yundong was stunned. Didn't this big sand wall student come last time? Why is he here again this time? Feng Na was shocked and quickly looked around. Are you crazy? How dare you scold the leader? Aren't you afraid of being transferred to another province? Li Yundong looked up and laughed. Okay, I was wrong. Why is this bastard here again? You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.